Step into the ancient world where the threads of fate, woven by the Moirae, bind the lives of soldiers, smiths, scribes, and weavers across centuries. From the Mycenaean camps of Achilles to medieval castles adorned with mythic tapestries, this series unveils the unsung labors forging bronze, managing plagues, and recording sieges that shaped epic histories. Each story reveals how ordinary tasks, from weaving cloth to crafting iron, wove the destiny of civilizations, connecting the past to our present in a tapestry of human resilience and ingenuity. The everyday duties of a Mycenaean soldier. Shadows of Achilles' root imagine yourself rising with the first light of dawn. In the rugged hills of Mycenae, around 1300 BCE, where the air carries the faint scent of olive groves and distant sea salt. As a common soldier in the service of a Wainax or king, your day begins not with the clash of heroic battles sung by poets, but with the quiet rhythm of preparation and maintenance that sustains an army. You stretch your limbs, feeling the ache from yesterday's drills, and reach for your simple woolen tunic woven by hands in your household. The Mycenaean world, perched on the edge of the Bronze Age collapse, relies on men like you foot soldiers whose lives echo the mundane foundations. Beneath the mythic rage of figures like Achilles, your morning starts with the inspection of gear. You polish your bronze spearhead, a modest piece forged from copper and tin traded from distant Cyprus, or the tin roots of the far north. Unlike the gleaming armor of legends, yours is a practical dendra panoply if you're fortunate, a heavy bronze cuirass weighing up to 18 kilograms, designed more for protection in phalanx formations than individual glory. You check for cracks, knowing that a single flaw could mean death in the next raid. Breakfast is sparse, barley porridge mixed with goat's milk, perhaps some dried figs from the palace stores. The king's citadel looms above, its cyclopean walls, built by laborers like your kin, stones so massive that later Greeks would attribute them to mythical cyclops. You eat quickly, sharing tales with comrades about the latest oracle from Delphi, where priests interpret smoke and bird flights to guide campaigns. By mid-morning, you join the ranks for training. The Mycenaean military isn't the chaotic horde of epic poems, it's organized with chariots for elites and infantry like you forming the backbone. You practice thrusting with your long ashwood spear, learning to hold the line against imagined Hittite foes or rival Greek polities. Sweat beads on your brow as you maneuver in unison, the ground churned to dust under sandaled feet. Survival here depends on disciplined strategies born from generations of skirmishes. Over fertile plains, you recall stories of Achilles, the swift-footed warrior whose wrath in the Iliad stemmed from personal slights, but in reality, such rages might reflect the frustrations of soldiers denied fair shares of plunder. Plunder, after all, is your incentive, bronze ingots, slaves, or livestock from raids on coastal settlements. As the sun climbs, you turn to camp duties. Repairing chariots is common, their lightweight frames, pulled by hardy horses bred in the Thessalian plains, require constant mending. You grease axles with animal fat, ensuring mobility for the next expedition. Water fetching follows from streams fed by mountain springs, where you might encounter shepherds reciting old tales of gods intervening in mortal affairs. These myths aren't mere entertainment, they shape your worldview, teaching that fate, or Moirae, weaves every action into an unchangeable tapestry. You ponder how Achilles' heel, a vulnerability born of divine dipping in the Styx, mirrors the real frailties soldiers face: disease, poor rations, or betrayal by allies. Lunch brings a brief respite, flatbread baked on hot stones, olives, and watered wine to stave off dehydration in the Mediterranean heat. Conversations drift to family, your wife tending the small plot of land allotted by the palace, growing wheat and vines under the watchful eye of Basilius overseers. The palace economy dictates much. Linear B tablets, inscribed in clay by scribes, record your contributions and dues. You're part of a system where soldiers double as farmers, their loyalty ensured by land grants. Yet, whispers of unrest circulate, droughts ruining harvests, earthquakes toppling walls, hinting at the era's impending turmoil. Afternoon brings more labor, fortifying outposts or scouting borders. You hike rocky paths, alert for bandits soar, envoys from Crete's waning Minoan influence. The landscape, dotted with Tholos tombs for the elite, reminds you of mortality. Achilles' story, preserved in oral traditions, speaks of undying Cleos, or glory, but for you, survival means navigating alliances like those fragile pacts between Mycenaean kings. As evening approaches, you return to camp, mending nets or sharpening daggers, the day's tedium underscoring the resilience required to endure. But as the stars emerge, tracing constellations that inspired tales of heroes, you wonder, what if a single act of rage, like Achilles, could unravel this careful balance of duty and fate? Picture yourself back in the Mycenaean camp as twilight settles over the Peloponnese. Around 1300 BCE, the firelight flickers, casting shadows on the faces of your fellow soldiers, each marked by the dust and weariness of another day serving. The Wainax, your life as a Mycenaean foot soldier, is not just about spears and drills. It's woven into a complex tapestry of loyalty, obligation, and fragile alliances that hold this Bronze Age world together. The epic tales of Achilles with his fiery defiance may echo in your mind, but here, in the grind of daily existence, you navigate a quieter but no less perilous path. Your afternoon duties shift from physical labor to the subtle art of maintaining relationships within the camp. The Mycenaean military is a patchwork of local contingents, each soldier tied to a basileus, a local chieftain who owes allegiance to the king. You deliver messages between these leaders, trudging across rocky paths to relay orders scratched on clay tablets in linear B. These tablets, baked hard to preserve records, detail everything: rations of barley, allocations of bronze, or the number of men fit for battle. You've seen scribes hunched over, their styluses etching precise symbols, ensuring the palace knows exactly how many goats or jars of olive oil your unit consumed. This bureaucratic precision, dull as it seems, is the backbone of survival. It ensures supplies flow, even when harvests falter under drought. Loyalty is your currency, but it's a fragile bond. You overhear grumbling among comrades about unequal shares of plunder. From recent raids on coastal villages, a bronze tripod or a handful of amber beads might seem trivial, but for men risking their lives, fair division is everything. Achilles' rage in the Iliad, sparked by Agamemnon's theft of his prize Briseis, feels less like myth and more like a reflection of these tensions. You've witnessed fights break out over a single ox hide, men shouting about honor while the basileus intervenes to prevent bloodshed. Your role is to stay neutral, mending ties with small gestures, sharing your ration of wine, or helping a comrade repair his cracked shield. The evening brings communal tasks, preparing the night's meal over a central hearth. You knead dough for flatbread while others slaughter a goat, its blood drained for offerings to appease the gods. Religion permeates your life. You sprinkle barley grains into the fire, muttering prayers to Ars or Athena, hoping for protection in the next skirmish. These rituals, rooted in centuries of tradition, mirror the stories of Achilles sacrificing to Zeus before battle. Yet, unlike the hero's dramatic offerings, yours are practical, born of necessity to keep morale steady in a world where omens like a hawk circling twice can halt a march. As you eat, talk turns to politics. Alliances between Mycenaean cities like Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylus are shaky, strained by competition for trade routes to Crete or Anatolia. You've heard of envoys arriving with gifts of pottery or gold, only to leave with veiled threats. Your own loyalty wavers as you think of your family, toiling on a small plot of land controlled by the palace. The Wainax grants land to secure your service, but rumors of unrest raids by sea peoples or rebellions in distant territories hint at a system under strain. The collapse of this world, though you can't foresee it, looms in the cracks of these alliances. Night falls and you stand watch, gazing at the starry sky. The constellations, named for gods and heroes, remind you of fate's unyielding grip. Achilles' story warns of hubris. But what of the common soldier's fate if a single broken alliance or a failed harvest could unravel your world? How do you balance duty with survival in such uncertain times? As the Mycenaean night deepens around 1300 BCE, you stand at the edge of the camp, the chill of the Peloponnese air seeping through your woolen cloak. The stars above, mapping tales of gods and heroes, seem to mock the precariousness of your existence as a foot soldier. The unresolved question of how to balance duty with survival in a fracturing world weighs heavily. Your life, like that of countless others, is tethered to the rhythms of the palace economy and the looming threats of collapse. Yet, it's in these final hours of the day that the true cost of your resilience comes into focus. Your watch duty is solitary, the camp quiet save for the crackle of dying fires and the occasional bleat of goats. You grip your spear, its bronze tip glinting faintly, and scan the horizon for signs of raider sea peoples or rival Greeks who might exploit the darkness. The Mycenaean world is not the heroic stage of the Iliad. It's a network of fragile polities, each dependent on trade and tribute. You've heard tales of distant cities like Knossos falling silent, their ships no longer arriving with grain or pottery. The palace scribes, with their linear tablets, obsess over dwindling stores, and you feel the pinch in your rations, less olive oil, thinner wine. Survival demands adaptability learning to stretch barley with wild herbs or two men's sandals with scraps of leather. The weight of loyalty, tested by strained alliances, presses harder now. You recall a comrade who deserted last month, fleeing to join a band of mercenaries after a dispute over plunder. His absence haunts the camp, a reminder that loyalty to the Wainax can falter when survival is at stake. Achilles' mythic defiance, withdrawing from battle over pride, mirrors these smaller betrayals. You wonder about your own limits. Would you risk everything for a slighted share of bronze, or a promise of land? The palace's grip, enforced through land grants and rations, feels like a chain, yet abandoning it means facing the wilderness, alone where bandits and famine await. Morning looms, and with it, the promise of another raid. You prepare for a skirmish against a neighboring polity, perhaps over grazing rights or a stolen shipment of tin. The Wainax rallies you with talk of glory, but you know the truth. Victory means a few extra bushels of wheat. Defeat means hunger. The battle itself is less poetic than the epic, smuddy, chaotic. With men falling to poorly aimed spears or dysentery from tainted water, you survive by instinct, holding the phalanx line, trusting the man beside you. The gods invoked through hurried offerings of wine and grain seem distant, their favor uncertain. As you return to camp, bruised but alive, you reflect on the resilience that defines you. The Mycenaean world, with its cyclopean walls and intricate bureaucracies, teeters on the edge of collapse, undone by droughts, invasions, and broken alliances. Yet, your survival through discipline, small acts of camaraderie, and stubborn endurance mirrors the quiet strength of countless others. Achilles' rage, immortalized in song, overshadows these anonymous lives. But it's your labor that built the world he fought in. This story of survival resonates beyond the Bronze Age. The collapse of Mycenaean Greece, marked by the fall of palaces and the loss of writing, gave way to a dark age, yet its myths endured, shaping Western literature. Today, when we face our own fragile systems, economic, environmental, or social, your life as a soldier reminds us that resilience lies in the mundane, in the daily choice to persevere. But as you lay down your spear, exhausted, a final question lingers. What legacies do we leave when our own systems falter? And who will sing of our unsung struggles? Forging bronze armor in ancient workshops, techniques from the heroic age step into a Mycenaean workshop around 1400 BCE, where the air is thick with the acrid tang of molten metal and the rhythmic clang of hammer on bronze. As a smith in Ostro, working in the shadow of legends like Achilles, you craft the armor that protects warriors in the heroic age. Your days are not filled with glory, but with the gritty, meticulous labor of forging bronze armor, a craft that blends artistry with survival. In this dusty, firelit space, you shape the tools of war that define the Mycenaean world. You begin at dawn, stoking the furnace with charcoal hauled from nearby forests. The heat is intense, sweat mixing with soot on your skin as you prepare. The crucible, bronze and alloy of copper and tin, is your medium copper from Cyprus. Tin from distant lands like Cornwall, traded through perilous sea routes. You measure the metals carefully, 9 parts copper to 1 part tin, heating them to a glowing red liquid. The process is slow, requiring patience to avoid impurities that could weaken a breastplate. You pour the molten bronze into clay molds, shaped like cuirasses or greaves, crafted by potters who work alongside you. These molds, baked hard in kilns, are your canvas, each one designed to fit a warrior's body. Your tools are simple but precise: stone hammers, bronze tongs, and wooden bellows to feed the fire. You hammer the cooled bronze into shape on an anvil, smoothing edges to ensure a snug fit. The dendra panoply, a heavy suit of bronze plates, is your specialty, weighing up to 18 kilograms and built for elite warriors. Unlike the mythic armor of Achilles, said to be forged by Hephaestus, yours is practical, designed for the phalanx's brutal clashes. You engrave simple patterns, spirals, or waves onto the surface, not for beauty but to honor the gods who oversee battle. Every strike of your hammer echoes the weight of lives depending on your skill. The workshop is a hub of activity. Apprentices, often boys from farming families, tend the fires and carry water to cool the metal. You teach them to watch for the bronze's color, a dull red signaling the right moment to pour. The palace overseer, a stern Basilius, visits to inspect your work, ensuring quotas are met for the Wainax's army. You work under pressure, knowing a flawed piece could mean death for a soldier. Lunch is a quick affair: barley bread and olives eaten beside the forge, your hands stained with soot. You share stories of past commissions: a helmet for a chariot warrior, its boar tusk reinforcements and nod to Homeric tales. Trade is the lifeblood of your craft. Merchants arrive with ox carts, delivering ingots of copper and rare tin. Their prices, inflated by the risks of piracy and storms, you barter with them, offering surplus spearheads for their goods, aware that the palace tracks every transaction on linear-beat tablets. The economy is fragile, with droughts threatening the grain that feeds your workers. As you polish a breastplate, you wonder about the warriors who'll wear it, men whose fates hinge on your craftsmanship. Achilles' invulnerability was a divine gift, but for mortal soldiers, your armor is their only shield as the sun sets. You bank the forge's fire, the workshop glowing faintly. The weight of your role sinks in. Every piece you craft is a thread in the tapestry of war, binding you to distant battles. But what happens when the supply of tin falters, or when the palace's demands outstrip your forge's capacity? You're back in the Mycenaean workshop, the heat of the forge a constant companion as you labor through the afternoon in 1400 BCE. The unresolved question of faltering tin supplies looms large, a threat to your craft and the warriors who depend on your bronze armor. As a smith, your work is the backbone of Mycenaean warfare, yet the fragility of trade routes and the palace's relentless demands test your resilience. Every hammer strike is a step toward survival, not just for you, but for the entire society. You focus on a new task, assembling a dendra panoply, the articulated bronze plates that form a warrior's armor. You rivet the plates together with bronze pins, ensuring flexibility for movement in battle. The process is painstaking. Each plate must align perfectly, or a gap could expose flesh to an enemy's spear. You recall the Iliad's description of Achilles' divine armor, its gleaming surfaces a poet's dream. Your reality is grittier, smoothing rough edges with pumice stones, testing joints by flexing them under torchlight. Apprentices watch closely, learning to replicate your steady hand. You teach them to listen for the metal's hum, a sign of proper tempering. The workshop hums with tension. A merchant's recent arrival brought news of raided trade ships, delaying tin shipments. Without tin, bronze cannot be made and your forge would fall silent. You adapt by reusing broken weapons, melting them down to conserve materials. This ingenuity is your survival strategy, honed over years of scarcity. You inspect a cracked helmet, deciding it can be reforged into greaves, saving precious resources. The palace's scribes record your output, their clay tablets tracking every ounce of metal. You feel the weight of their scrutiny, knowing a shortfall could cost you your position. Lunch is shared with your team, dried figs, goat cheese, and watered wine to dull the heat's edge. You discuss the war campaigns fueling demand for armor raids. On coastal towns, clashes with Hittite outposts. Warriors like Achilles, whose rage defined the Trojan War, wore armor like yours, but their stories overshadow the smith's role. You wonder about the men who'll don your creations, their lives entwined with your craftsmanship. A flawed rivet could mean death, a perfect seam, survival. You instill this responsibility in your apprentices who dream of crafting for kings, but must first master the basics. The afternoon brings a visit from the Basilius, who demands faster production for an upcoming campaign. You negotiate, explaining the limits of your small forge. He mentions omens a two-headed calf born nearby interpreted by priests as a call to war. You nod, but your mind is on the forge's dwindling charcoal supply, the palace economy ties. You to its rhythms, land for food, metal for armor, loyalty for survival. Yet, cracks are showing fewer merchants arrive, and rumors of distant upheavals unsettle the workers dot as evening falls. You polish a finished cuirass, its surface reflecting the fire's glow. You test its weight, imagining the warrior who'll wear it into battle. The Mycenaean world depends on your skill, but the fragility of its systems, trade, resources, trust mirrors the bronze you shape. You bank the forge, the embers fading, and ponder the future. If the supply chains collapse, how will your craft endure, and what will become of the warriors who rely on your armor? Night cloaks the Mycenaean workshop in 1400 BCE, the forges, embers casting a faint glow as you, the smith, complete the day's work. The question of enduring through collapsing supply chains lingers, a shadow over your craft. Forging bronze armor is your life's work, a meticulous blend of skill and survival that armors warriors like those in Achilles' saga. As the Mycenaean world teeters on the edge of decline, your resilience shapes its final days. Leaving a legacy that echoes through history, you finish a set of greaves, hammering the bronze to a smooth sheen under the stars. Each piece is a testament to your expertise, designed to protect shins in the chaos of battle. You test the fit, sliding them onto a wooden dummy, ensuring they won't chafe during long marches. The workshop is quiet now, apprentices gone to their pallets, but you remain, driven by the knowledge that your armor is the difference between life and death. Unlike Achilles' divine shield, your creations are mortal, bearing the imperfections of human hands, yet they carry the weight of survival, crafted to withstand the spears of enemies. The scarcity of tin, a critical component of bronze, haunts you. You've melted down damaged weapons to stretch supplies, but the palace's demands grow. A recent Linearby tablet reported a shortfall in copper, too, hinting at strained trade with Cyprus. You've adapted by forging light armor, sacrificing some protection for efficiency. This ingenuity reflects the resilience of your people, who face droughts and raids with stubborn endurance. You teach your apprentices to salvage every scrap, knowing the collapse of trade could end your craft. The Basilius's latest order armor for 50 men by month's end feels impossible, but you nod. Hiding your doubt stock by lamplight, you engrave a breastplate with a simple wave pattern, a nod to the sea that brings both wealth and peril. The Iliad's tales of Achilles, clad in god-forged armor, inspire pride. But you know the truth. Warriors rely on your mortal skill. You recall a soldier who returned, his cuirass dented but intact, proof of your work's worth. Such moments fuel your resolve, even as the palace economy falters. You share a late meal with a fellow smith, barley porridge and dried fish discussing rumors of distant cities falling. The Mycenaean world, with its cyclopean walls and heroic ideals, feels fragile, like bronze stretched to thin dot. As you bank the forge, you reflect on your legacy. The armor you craft will outlast you, buried in Tholo's tombs or lost in battle, yet its purpose endures to protect, to survive. The collapse of Mycenaean civilization, though you cannot foresee it, will bury your workshop under ash, but the techniques you honed bronze working, riveting, tempering will echo in later cultures. From Greek hoplites to Roman legionaries, your craft, born of necessity, shaped the heroic age. Today, we marvel at Mycenaean artifacts in museums, their bronze surfaces pitted but enduring. Your story, unsung beside Achilles' rage, reminds us that survival lies in the hands of the diligent, the craftsmen who forge resilience into metal. As you extinguish the forge's last embers, a final thought stirs. What endures when empires fall? And how will future generations remember the quiet labor that armed their heroes? The role of fate in Greek harvest cycles, oracles, and agricultural decisions. Imagine yourself standing in a sun-drenched field in Boeotia, around 1200 BCE, the air heavy with the scent of ripening barley and the distant hum of cicadas. As a farmer, in the Mycenaean world, your life is bound to the harvest cycle, a delicate dance between human effort and the will of the gods. The concept of fate, or Moirae, governs not just battles but the very soil you till. Your decisions when to sow, when to reap are guided by oracles whose cryptic words shape the survival of your village. In this age, where Achilles' rage is a distant tale, your struggle is with the land and the divine forces that dictate its bounty each morning. You rise before dawn, your hands calloused from wielding a wooden plough drawn by oxen. The fields, allocated by the palace, are yours to work but not to own. The Wainax claims a portion of your yield, recorded by scribes on linear tablets. You scatter barley seeds, praying to Demeter for fertility, knowing that a poor harvest could mean hunger or rebellion. The Mycenaean economy depends on agriculture. Barley, wheat, olives, and vines sustain both your family and the warriors who guard the citadel. Your tools are simple: a bronze sickle for reaping, a clay jar for storing grain. Every action is a ritual, tying you to the gods who weave fate's threads. The oracle at Delphi, a day's journey away, is your guide. You've heard of priests interpreting the rustle of leaves or the flight of birds to predict the season's outcome. Last month, a neighbor returned from the sanctuary, his face pale, relaying the oracle's warning: plant late, for the rains will linger. You hesitate, knowing early planting risks frost, but late planting could miss the rains. The oracle's words are not commands but riddles, leaving you to balance faith and pragmatism. You recall myths of Triptolemus, gifted agriculture by Demeter, and wonder if your fields carry such divine favor. Midday brings a break under an olive tree, where you share bread and watered wine with other farmers. Talk turns to the palace's demands: more grain for soldiers, more oil for trade. The Wainax relies on your harvest to fund campaigns, like those in the tales of Troy. But drought has plagued Boeotia for 2 seasons and the soil cracks underfoot. You've adapted, digging irrigation channels fed by mountain streams, a technique learned from Minoan traders. Yet, the gods will feel capricious earthquakes have shaken nearby villages, and whispers of angry deities spread. You offer a handful of barley to the earth, a small sacrifice to appease unseen forces. As you return to work, guiding your oxen through the furrows, you reflect on Moirae. Fate, in the Mycenaean mind, is not just death but the rhythm of life seasons. Harvest's survival. Achilles defied fate in his rage, but you, a farmer, must submit to it. Trusting oracles to navigate uncertainty, the sun sets, painting the fields gold, and you pause, sickle in hand. If the oracle's prophecy fails, or if the rains don't come, how will you and your village endure the hunger that follows? The sun climbs higher over your Boeotian field in 1200 BCE, its heat pressing down as you, a Mycenaean farmer, continue your work amidst the looming question of an uncertain harvest. The oracle's cryptic warning to plant late echoes in your mind, a thread of fate woven into the soil you till. Your survival, and that of your village, hinges on balancing divine guidance with the relentless labor required to coax life from the earth. In this world, where myths like Achilles' rage glorify warriors, your quieter struggle shapes the foundation of Mycenaean life. You spend the afternoon harvesting olives, climbing rickety ladders to shake ripe fruit onto woven mats. Each olive, destined for oil, is a currency of survival traded for bronze tools or offered to the palace as tribute. The work is grueling, your back aching as you carry heavy baskets to the press, where stones crush the fruit into golden liquid. You oversee the process, ensuring no oil is wasted, aware that the palace scribes track every jar. Linear tablets, etched with symbols you cannot read, dictate your obligations. A third of your yield goes to the Wainax, leaving you to stretch. The rest through winter. The oracle's influence lingers. You've delayed planting your barley, heeding the prophecy, but neighbors whisper doubts some planted early, risking frost. You visit the local shrine, A small stone altar to Demeter, offering a clay figurine shaped like a sheaf of wheat. The priestess, her face lined with age, interprets a sudden wind as a sign of divine approval. But you're unsure. Myths tell of gods punishing hubris, yet survival demands action. You recall tales of Tantalus, cursed for defying the gods, and wonder if your trust in oracles risks a similar fate. To hedge your bets, you repair irrigation ditches, ensuring water reaches your fields if the rains fail. Lunch is a communal affair, shared with other farmers under a fig tree. You eat barley bread and dried fish, discussing the oracle's reliability. One man recounts a failed prophecy that led to a lost harvest. His family now reliant on palace handouts. The Mycenaean system is unforgiving. Famine weakens loyalty, and hungry farmers may turn to banditry. You've seen the palace's power wane as trade routes falter, with fewer merchants bringing tin or grain. The drought, now in its third year, tests your resilience, forcing you to plant hardy spelt alongside. Barley, a crop more resistant to dry soil. As evening nears, you check your stored grain, sealed in clay pith oil to deter pests. The work is endless, yet each task sowing, irrigating, praying ties you to Moirae, the fate that governs seasons and lives. Achilles' story, with its defiance of fate, feels distant. Your battle is with the land, where failure means starvation. You teach your children to scatter seeds evenly, passing on survival strategies honed through generations. But as you watch the horizon, clouds gathering but not breaking, the question gnaws: if the oracle's guidance fails and the harvest withers, how will you navigate the wrath of both gods and men? Night falls over your Boeotian fields in 1200 BCE. The stars a silent map of fate above your weary frame. The question of surviving a failed harvest, should the oracle's prophecy prove wrong, clings to you like dust. As a Mycenaean farmer, your life is a testament to resilience, balancing faith in divine Moirae with the practical demands of coaxing life from the earth. In this final stretch, the harvest's outcome reveals the delicate interplay between human effort and the god's will, shaping your village's fate. You rise early, inspecting the barley fields you planted late, as the oracle advised. The stalks are thin, strained by the persistent drought, but they stand a fragile victory. You wield your bronze sickle, cutting sheaves with care, while your family stacks them for threshing. The work is methodical, each swing of the sickle a prayer for enough grain to last the winter. The palace expects its share, and you calculate. What remains after tribute? Barely enough for your household. You've supplemented with wild herbs and lentils, survival tactics learned from lean years. The oracle's guidance, though uncertain, seems to have spared you the worst. Neighbors who planted early lost crops to late frost. The harvest festival follows, a subdued affair under the drought's shadow. You offer a portion of grain to Demeter at the village altar, joined by others who chant hymns to secure next season's bounty. The priestess interprets a flock of birds as a sign of cautious optimism, but you know survival depends on your own preparations. You've stored oil and grain in clay jars, sealed against rats, and repaired your plough for the next planting. The palace's demands grow heavier: more grain for soldiers, more oil for trade, yet its protection feels distant as raids by sea peoples increase. You hear of distant cities burning, their fields left fallow, and wonder if your village is next. Your children, helping to carry baskets of olives, ask about Achilles, whose rage defied fate. You explain that heroes are rare. Most lives, like yours, are shaped by quiet endurance, sowing despite drought, praying despite doubt. The Mycenaean world, with its palaces and oracles, is fraying, its collapse a shadow you cannot yet see, but your resilience digging irrigation channels, bartering surplus oil for tools holds your family together. The linear tablets, recording your tribute, will one day be buried under ash, but your strategies endure in the oral tales passed to your descendants. The harvest success, though modest, is a triumph of adaptation. As you rest, the fields, stretching dark under the moon, you reflect on Moirae. Fate is not just divine will, but the choices you make, trusting oracles, yet acting to survive. This story resonates today, as we face uncertain climates and fragile systems. Your life, uncelebrated beside Achilles' epic, shows that survival lies in persistence. In reading the land as carefully as an oracle's words, the Mycenaean collapse, when it comes, will scatter your people, but the seeds you plant, literal and figurative, will root in later cultures. From Greek city-states to modern farms, as you close your eyes, one question lingers when fate and effort collide. What stories will endure to tell of your quiet victories? Medieval scribes copying Homeric texts, preserving Achilles' legacy in monastery step, into a dimly lit scriptorium in a Benedictine monastery in 10th century Constantinople, where the air smells of vellum and ink, and the soft scratch of quills fills the silence. As a medieval scribe, you are tasked with copying ancient texts, including the epic poems of Homer, which recount Achilles' rage and the Trojan War. Your work, far removed from the Mycenaean battlefields of 1200 BCE, preserves these stories for a new age. In this quiet labor, you bridge the ancient and medieval worlds, ensuring the survival of tales that shape Christian and Byzantine thought. You rise at dawn, your breath visible in the chilly stone chamber. After morning prayers, you settle at your slanted desk, a sheet of parchment before you, made from calfskin scraped thin and smoothed with pumice. Your tools are simple: a goose feather quill, ink mixed from oak galls and iron salts, and a knife to sharpen your pen. The Iliad, your current task, lies open on a wooden stand, its Greek script faded but legible, copied from a papyrus roll centuries old. You work slowly, forming each letter with precision, aware that a single error could corrupt the text. The monastery depends on your accuracy, as these manuscripts are treasures, traded for gold or gifted to emperors. The Iliad's tales of Achilles, with his divine armor and wrathful pride, feel distant yet resonant. You pause, reading of his clash with Agamemnon, and ponder its lessons on hubris, a theme your abbot weaves into sermons. The Byzantine Empire, like Mycenaean Greece, is a world of fragile alliances, with threats from Bulgars and Arabs testing its borders. Your work is not just copying, it's an act of cultural survival, preserving stories that teach resilience and fate's weight. You illuminate the manuscript's margins with small crosses, blending Christian piety with pagan epic, a nod to the empire's synthesis of old and new. Midday brings a break, coarse bread, lentils, and watered wine shared with fellow scribes in the refectory. You discuss the text's challenges, unfamiliar words, damaged pages, and share tales of earlier scribes who saved Homer's works from the fall of Rome. The monastery's library, a vault of cedar shelves, holds codices of Plato, Aristotle, and scripture, but Homer's epics are prized for their moral weight. You've heard of scholars in Baghdad translating Greek texts, a reminder that your labor connects distant cultures. Yet, the work is grueling, your fingers ache, and candlelight strains your eyes. As you resume copying, you note the monastery's economy mirrors the Mycenaean palace system. Scribes like you are supported by tithes, just as farmers once paid tribute. The empire's stability depends on such labor. Yet rumors of Viking raids and internal strife unsettle you. You inscribe Achilles' lament for Patroclus, feeling the universal grief of loss. Your role is to preserve, but the fragility of parchment and empire weighs on you. As Vespers approach, you set down your quill, the page half filled. If these texts are lost to fire or war, what will remain of Achilles' story, and how will your labor shape the future? You're back in the Constantinople scriptorium, the year 990 CE, hunched over your parchment as candlelight flickers across the Iliad's Greek text. The question of preserving Achilles' story through war and time lingers, a weight as heavy as the vellum you handle. As a scribe, your task is not just to copy, but to safeguard a legacy that binds the Byzantine world to its ancient roots. Each stroke of your quill is a defense against oblivion, a quiet act of resilience in a turbulent age. You begin the day's work, copying the scene where Achilles arms for battle, his divine shield gleaming in Homer's verse. The Greek is dense, its archaic forms challenging even your trained eye. You consult a lexicon, its pages worn from use, to decipher words lost to common speech. Your script, a careful minuscule, ensures legibility for future readers, monks, scholars, or nobles. The monastery's abbot insists on precision, for these manuscripts are diplomatic gifts, sent to allies like the Holy Roman Empire or preserved for the Emperor's library. You add a marginal note in red ink, a gloss explaining Achilles' rage, blending Christian virtues with pagan heroism. The scriptorium buzzes with quiet activity. A younger scribe, your apprentice, prepares ink, grinding charcoal and gum arabic while asking about Troy's fall. You explain how Homer's tales, once oral, were written on fragile papyrus, nearly lost in the West's collapse. Your monastery, a fortress of knowledge, stands against such loss, yet the work is taxing your wrist cramps, and damp air warps the parchment. You stretch the vellum taut, securing it with pins, and sharpen your quill again, its tip blunted by hours of use. The rhythm is meditative, but errors haunt you. A smudged letter could alter a line's meaning. Lunch offers respite. Barley soup and dried figs, eaten while debating scriptures placed beside pagan texts. Some monks argue Homer's stories glorify sin, but you see parallels Achilles. Pride mirrors David's flaws, both teaching humility. The Byzantine Empire, like Mycenaean Greece, faces threats, invasions, schisms, and fires that could consume your work. You've heard of libraries burned in Alexandria, their texts reduced to ash. Your monastery fortifies its walls, and you fortify the text, binding pages into codices with leather covers. Sealed against time. Afternoon brings a visitor, a scholar from Athens, seeking a copy of the Iliad for a noble's collection. You barter, exchanging a finished manuscript for wax tablets and rare ink. The empire's economy, strained by war, relies on such trade, much like the Mycenaean palaces depended on bronze and grain. You resume copying, inscribing Achilles' duel with Hector, his fate sealed by divine scales. The story's weight resonates. Fate, or Moirae, governs your world too, where a scribe's error or a raid could undo years of labor. As evening falls, you light another candle, its smoke curling upward. The manuscript nears completion, but the empire's fragility mirrors the parchment's own. You pause, quill hovering, and wonder, if Constantinople falters as Troy did, will your copies of Homer endure? Or will Achilles' rage fade into silence? The Constantinople scriptorium grows still as midnight nears in 990 CE. The glow of your candle casting shadows on the nearly finished manuscript of the Iliad. The question of whether Achilles' story will outlast the empire's turmoil weighs on you, a scribe tasked with preserving a heroic legacy. Your work, though unglamorous, is a lifeline for knowledge, ensuring that the tales of Troy and the lessons of fate endure beyond the monastery's walls. This final labor reveals the resilience of words and their power to shape history. You complete the last lines of the Iliad, inscribing Achilles' reconciliation with Priam, a moment of humanity amid rage. Your hand trembles from fatigue, but each letter is precise, a testament to years of discipline. You bind the parchment sheets into a codex, stitching them with linen thread and encasing them in wooden boards covered with leather. The manuscript, adorned with simple gold leaf, is ready for the monastery's library or a distant patron. You've added scholar notes in the margins linking Achilles' pride to Christian teachings, ensuring the text speaks to your era's soul. The monastery's bell tolls for Compline, but you linger, reflecting on your role. The Byzantine Empire, like Mycenaean Greece, teeters on fragile foundations, wars with Bulgars, disputes with Rome, and fires that threaten libraries. You've seen codices damaged by damp, their ink bleeding into illegibility. To counter this, you've learned to store manuscripts in cedar chests, sealed against moisture. Your resilience mirrors that of the farmers and warriors in Homer's tales, who faced drought and battled with stubborn endurance. You teach your apprentice to mix ink with vinegar for permanence, a small act of defiance against time. A final meal, bread and cheese, brings talk of the empire's future. A fellow scribe fears invasion, another trusts in God's protection. You see parallels in the Iliad. Troy fell, but its story survived through poets and scribes like you. The Mycenaean collapse buried Linear B, yet oral traditions carried Homer's words until they reached your quill. Your work ensures they'll reach future generations, from Venetian scholars to Renaissance poets. You've copied other texts, Plato, scripture, but Homer's epics, with their raw human truths, feel vital, a bridge between pagan past and Christian present. As you extinguish your candle, the scriptorium darkens, but the manuscript gleams. Faintly, your labor, unnoticed beside Achilles' heroics, is a quiet victory. The Byzantine Empire will fall in time, as all empires do, but your codices, carried to monasteries in Italy or preserved in Islamic libraries, will endure. Today, we read Homer in translations rooted in your work, his tales shaping literature, ethics, and art. Your story, like that of countless scribes, teaches that resilience lies in the meticulous, in the quill's scratch, the parchment's care. As you leave the scriptorium, a final question stirs when empires crumble. What stories will we choose to preserve, and who will carry them forward? Daily rations and survival tactics for Trojan war foot soldiers. Picture yourself in a sprawling encampment on the Trojan plain around 1250 BCE, where the dust of Ilium's fields mixes with the smoke of campfires. As a foot soldier in the Achaean army, your life is not the heroic clash of Achilles' rage, but the relentless grind of survival, sustained by meager rations and cunning tactics. The Trojan War, immortalized by Homer, is your reality, and every day tests your endurance in the shadow of Troy's unyielding walls. You wake at dawn, your body stiff from sleeping on a reed mat under a canvas tent. The air carries the scent of salt from the nearby Aegean and the faint rot of yesterday's fish. Your rations, doled out by the camp's quartermasters, are sparse: a handful of barley, a sliver of dried goat meat, and a cup of watered wine. You cook the barley into a thin gruel over a shared fire, stirring it with a wooden spoon while comrades grumble about the siege's 10th year. The palace economy, ruled by kings like Agamemnon, controls supplies, with scribes tallying every sack of grain on clay tablets in Linear B. Your survival depends on these rations, but they're never enough. Your morning is spent maintaining gear. You sharpen your bronze dagger, traded from a Cretan merchant, and mend your leather sandals, worn thin by rocky terrain. Your armor, if you're lucky, is a simple bronze breastplate, far humbler than Achilles' divine gear. Most soldiers make do with padded linen, stitched by their own hands. You check your shield docks hide stretched over a wooden frame for cracks. Knowing a single flaw could spell death, the camp buzzes with activity. Men repair chariots, braid rope, or barter for extra olives. Survival demands resourcefulness. You've learned to soak barley in seawater to stretch it, a trick passed down by veterans. By midday, you join a foraging party, scouring the countryside for wild herbs or stray goats. Troy's walls block access to its fertile fields, so you raid nearby villages. Risking ambushes by Trojan scouts, you carry a sling, its stones deadly in skilled hands, to fend off dogs or foes. Back at camp, you share the spoils a few leeks, a sack of lentils, while listening to tales of Achilles' latest feud with Agamemnon. His rage, sparked by a stolen prize, mirrors the tensions over plunder here. You've seen fights break out over a bronze cup, settled only by a captain's whip. The gods loom large in your world. Before eating, you pour a libation of wine to Poseidon, praying for safe seas to bring supplies. Myths of fate or Moirae shape your mindset. Every spear thrust, every meal, is woven into its tapestry. The camp seer reads omens in a hawk's flight, warning of a tough battle ahead. As you chew tough goat meat under the midday sun, you wonder, if rations dwindle and Troy holds firm, how will you endure another year of this siege? The sun climbs higher over the Trojan plain in 1250 BCE, its heat baking the Achaean camp, where you, a foot soldier, grapple with the question of enduring another year of siege. The scarcity of rations and the grind of war test your ingenuity, forcing you to master survival tactics that keep you alive amidst the shadow of Achilles' mythic exploits. Your life is a delicate balance of duty, cunning, and faith played out in the mundane tasks that sustain the army. Afternoon brings patrol duty along the camp's perimeter, a wooden palisade built to deter Trojan raids. You carry a spear and a wicker shield, eyes scanning for movement across the Scamander River. The terrain is treacherous muddy banks, thorny scrub, but you've learned to move silently, a skill honed from hunting rabbits to supplement rations. Back at camp, you help repair a damaged chariot, greasing its axles with pig fat to keep it mobile. These tasks, though tedious, are vital. A broken will could strand warriors in battle. You trade a sharpened flint for a handful of dried figs, bartering being as crucial as fighting. Rations remain a constant worry. The quartermasters distribute barley and lentils, but portions shrink as supply ships from Mycenaean arrive late, delayed by storms or pirates. You've adapted, mixing ground acorns into your gruel for bulk. A trick learned from a Thessalian comrade. Water is another challenge. The river is fouled by camp waste, so you dig shallow wells, filtering water through. Linen to remove grit. These small innovations, shared among soldiers, are your shield against starvation. You recall Achilles' rage over honor, but your battles are humbler against hunger, disease, and despair. Evening brings a communal meal, cooked over a central fire. You roast a scrawny hare, caught with a snare, and share it with your tent mates. Conversation turns to the gods. A seer's prophecy to crows circling the camp suggests a victory soon, but you're skeptical. You offer a pinch of barley to Athena, praying for strength, though you rely more on your own resourcefulness. The camp's hierarchy mirrors the Iliad's tensions. Captains hoard better rations, leaving you to scavenge. You've seen men steal from stores, risking flogging, and wonder how long loyalty can hold. The palace economy binds you with scribes, recording every bushel of grain. You've heard of distant cities like Pylos struggling with drought, their supplies dwindling. The siege's success hinges on these logistics, yet Troy's walls stand firm. You mend a torn cloak, stitching with sinew thread, and teach a younger soldier to do the same. Survival is a collective effort, rooted in shared knowledge how to preserve fish, how to spot edible weeds. As night falls, you lie on your mat, the stars above echoing tales of fate. Achilles defied his Moirae, but yours feels inescapable, tied to the camp's survival. If supplies fail and the siege drags on, what new tactics will you devise to outlast Troy's defiance? Night cloaks the Achaean camp on the Trojan plain in 1250 BCE, the flicker of campfires illuminating your weary face as a foot soldier. The question of outlasting Troy with dwindling supplies haunts you, a test of the survival tactics that define your existence. The Trojan War, with its heroic tales of Achilles, is your daily struggle, and as the siege nears its climax, your resilience shapes its outcome, leaving a legacy that resonates beyond the battlefield. You rise for a dawn skirmish, your stomach growling from last night's scant meal of barley porridge and wild greens. The captains, spurred by a seer's omen, plan a raid on a Trojan supply line. You join the phalanx, gripping your spear, your patched linen armor offering meager protection. The clash is brutal, but brief arrows fly, bronze clangs, and you return with sacks of wheat stolen from a Trojan cart. The victory boosts morale, but injuries and dysentery from bad water thin your ranks. You bind a comrade's wound with linen strips, using a salve of honey and herbs, a remedy learned from camp healers. Back at camp, you ration the stolen grain, mixing it with lentils to feed your unit. The siege has taught you economy. Every crumb is saved, every bone boiled for broth. You've mastered snares for birds and know which roots are safe to eat. These skills, born of necessity, mirror the resilience of the Mycenaean world, where survival hinges on adaptation. Achilles' rage, immortalized in song, overshadows your quiet victories, preserving a week's rations, repairing a shield with salvaged wood. Yet, your efforts sustain the army, enabling the hero's deeds. The camp's mood shifts as rumors spread of a wooden horse, a desperate ploy to breach Troy's walls. You help gather timber, your hands blistered from soaring, unsure if this trick will end the war. The gods will feels distant. You pour wine for hours, but trust your sling and wits more. The palace economy falters, supply ships are rarer, and scribes' tablets show dwindling stores. You've seen men desert, driven by hunger, their loyalty broken. You stay, bound by camaraderie and the hope of plunder, though Troy's fall seems a distant dream. As the siege ends, whether by horse or battle, you survive, returning to your village with a few bronze trinkets. The war's cost is heavy. Comrades lost, fields neglected. The Mycenaean collapse looms, driven by famine and raids. but your tactics bartering, foraging, enduring carry forward in oral traditions. Homer's epics, later written down, hint at your life, the unsung soldiers who fed the war machine. Today, your story echoes in our own struggles with scarcity, teaching that resilience lies in small, shared acts of survival. As you rest under Troy's fading stars, a final question lingers when the world shifts. What tactics will we pass on to endure our own sieges? The balance of hubris and humility, lessons from lesser-known Greek seer Imogene yourself. In a small sanctuary on the outskirts of Thebes, around 1300 BCE, where the air carries the scent of burning laurel and the faint bleat of sacrificial goats. As a lesser-known seer in the Mycenaean world, your role is not to wield a spear like Achilles, but to interpret the gods' will, guiding your community through the delicate balance of hubris and humility. Your life, far from the epic tales of the Iliad, is one of quiet observation, deciphering omens to steer mortals away from divine wrath. You begin your day at dawn, sweeping the stone altar dedicated to Apollo, its surface stained from years of offerings. Your tools are simple: a bronze knife for sacrifices, a clay bowl for libations, and your own keen senses, trained to read the flight of birds or the curl of smoke. Thebes, a bustling hub of trade and agriculture, relies on seers like you to predict harvests, wars, or plagues. Unlike the famed Calchas who advised Agamemnon, you serve farmers and merchants, your prophecies shaping their daily choices. You wear a plain woolen robe, your only distinction a laurel wreath, signaling your sacred role. Morning brings a petitioner, a farmer worried about his wilting barley. You perform a ritual, burning thyme and watching the smoke's path. It rises, straight, a good sign, and you advise him to irrigate more deeply, blending divine insight with practical knowledge. Your words carry weight, rooted in myths of fate, or Moirae, which binds all actions. You recall tales of Icarus, whose hubris led to his fall, and urge humility in offerings to Demeter. The farmer leaves a small basket of figs as thanks, a modest payment in a palace economy where scribes track every transaction on linear tablets docked by midday. You sit under an olive tree, sipping watered wine and eating flatbread with your apprentice, a young girl learning to read entrails. You teach her to distinguish a healthy liver from a diseased one, a skill passed down through generations. The Mycenaean world is fragile, droughts parch the fields, and raids by sea peoples threaten trade routes. Your prophecies, though small, help Thebes navigate these perils. You've heard of Achilles' pride, defying fate in his rage, but your role is to temper such hubris, guiding your people to accept Moira's limits. As you prepare for an evening ritual, a merchant arrives, seeking guidance on a voyage to Crete. You sacrifice a dove, its blood pooling on the altar, and study its flight before death erratic, a warning of storms. You advise delay, knowing a wrong prophecy could doom him. The weight of your role presses on you. Hubris in misreading signs could anger the gods, bringing calamity. As the sun sets, casting shadows over Thebes' cyclopean walls, you wonder, if your omens fail to avert disaster, how will you balance the gods' wrath with your community's trust? The afternoon sun bathes your Theban sanctuary in 1300 BCE. Its warmth a contrast to the heavy question of maintaining trust if your omens fail. As a Mycenaean seer, your life is a delicate dance between interpreting divine will and guiding your people away from hubris, much like the mythic warnings woven into Achilles' tale. Your small prophecies, though less grand than those of Trojan war seers, are the threads that hold Thebes together in a world of uncertainty. You resume your duties, preparing for a communal ritual to bless the harvest. You light a fire of olive wood, its smoke mingling with the scent of myrrh, and sacrifice a lamb, its entrails revealing a healthy liver, a sign of Demeter's favor. The gathered farmers, their faces lined with worry from drought, listen as you declare a bountiful season if they deepen their irrigation channels. Your words blend divine insight with practical advice, a balance you've honed to counter the hubris of defying fate. You recall the myth of Niobe, whose pride led to her children's slaughter, and urge modesty in their offerings. Your apprentice, eager but untested, assists by scattering barley grains into the fire. You teach her to watch the flames color blue. For divine approval, red for warning. Thebes' survival depends on such signs. As the palace's grain stores dwindle and trade with Crete falters, you've heard of Lineae tablets recording shortfalls, a reminder of the economy's fragility. Your role is to bolster confidence, yet doubt gnaws at you. A misread omen could lead to famine, eroding the trust you've built. You share a midday, meal olives and goat cheese with a visiting priest, discussing the oracle at Delphi, whose cryptic words guide kings. Your own prophecies, though humbler, carry similar weight for Thebes' common folk. Afternoon brings a new petitioner, a warrior seeking Apollo's guidance for a raid against a rival city. You cast lots, small bones etched with symbols and read their pattern. A narrow victory, but at great cost. You advise caution, citing Achilles' costly rage in the Iliad. A story passed down orally, the warrior, bristling with pride, hesitates, but leaves a bronze dagger as thanks. You store it, knowing such gifts sustain your sanctuary. The Mycenaean world, like Troy's, is fraught with tensions alliances break, and hubris fells the mighty. Your counsel aims to temper such flaws, urging humility before Moirae evening nears. You clean the altar, your hands stained with ash and blood. Thebes' cyclopean walls loom in the distance, a symbol of strength yet vulnerability. You've seen earthquakes crack their stones, omens of divine displeasure. Your apprentice asks if the gods ever forgive errors in prophecy. You pause, unsure, recalling tales of seers blamed for misfortune. Your resilience lies in precision in reading signs correctly to guide your people. But as stars emerge, tracing constellations of gods, a question lingers. If hubris overtakes humility in Thebes, can your prophecies steer it back to safety? Night envelops your Theban sanctuary in 1300 BCE, the stars above a silent testament. To Moirae as you, a Mycenaean seer, ponder the question of guiding Thebes through hubris toward safety. Your role, though overshadowed by Achilles' epic defiance, is to weave humility into the fabric of your community. Using omens to navigate a world on the brink of collapse, your prophecies, small but vital, shape the survival of a people bound by fate. You begin the evening with a final ritual, burning laurel leaves to honor Apollo. A merchant, delayed by your earlier prophecy, returns with news his ship avoided a storm. Crediting your warning, you accept his gift, a clay jar of olive oil, with a nod. Relieved your omen held true, your apprentice, now more confident, records the event on a wax tablet, a practice you've taught to track predictions. Thebes thrives on such trust, but it's fragile. You recall a seer in Pylos, blamed for a failed harvest, exiled despite his pleas. Your resilience lies in accuracy, in reading the gods' signs to avert disaster. The night's quiet is broken by a runner from the palace, reporting an earthquake that damaged a village granary. You perform a hasty divination, tossing knuckle bones. To discern Apollo's mood, the pattern suggests caution, rebuild slowly, offer more to the gods. You relay this to the runner, urging the Wainax to distribute stored grain to calm unrest. The Mycenaean economy, strained by drought and raids, mirrors the Iliad's tensions, where Achilles' pride nearly doomed the Achaeans. Your counsel, rooted in humility, counters such hubris, guiding Thebes to share resources rather than hoard. As you teach your apprentice to interpret a comet streak, you reflect on your legacy. The Mycenaean collapse, though unseen, looms. Palaces will burn, Lineae will vanish. Yet, your teachings, passed orally, will endure in the seas of later Greece. From Delphi's Pythia to the oracles of Dodona, your emphasis on humility, learned from myths like Arachne's fall, shapes a mindset that tempers ambition with reverence for fate. You share a late meal, barley bread and figs, with your apprentice, telling her how Homer's tales, though centuries away, will echo your warnings against pride. The sanctuary darkens as you douse the fire, its embers fading like Thebes' glory. Your prophecies, though uncelebrated, are a lifeline, steering your people through uncertainty. Today, we see your legacy in the enduring myths of fate, in stories that urge balance over hubris. Your life, a quiet counterpoint to Achilles' rage, teaches that survival lies in listening to signs, to gods, to humility. As you rest under the starry sky, A final question stirs when our own world faces collapse. What lessons of balance will we heed to navigate our fate? Assembling shields and helmets, craftsmanship in archaic Greek smithy. Imagine yourself stepping into the dim, soot-filled confines of an archaic Greek smithy, sometime around the 7th century BCE, in a bustling polis like Corinth or Athens. The air hangs heavy with the acrid scent of charcoal smoke and molten metal, a constant hum of hammers striking anvils echoing off the clay brick walls. You are not amidst the grandeur of temples or the clamor of battlefields, but in the unassuming workshops where ordinary craftsmen, bronzesmiths known as Chorkais, labor day after day to forge the tools of survival and warfare. These men, often from humble backgrounds, were the unsung architects of Greek military prowess. Their work a meticulous blend of skill, patience, and inherited knowledge passed down through generations. In this era, spanning roughly from 800 to 480 BCE, Greece was emerging from the Dark Ages, with city-states forming alliances and rivalries that demanded reliable armament. Shields and helmets were not mere accessories, but essential extensions of the hoplite warrior's body. Designed for the phalanx formation where men stood shoulder to shoulder, their defenses interlocking like a living wall. You might picture the smithy as a modest structure, perhaps attached to a family home on the outskirts of the city, with an open hearth fueled by charcoal from nearby olive groves, bellows operated by apprentices pumping leather bags with steady rhythm, forced air into the fire to reach temperatures exceeding 1000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to soften bronze without melting it entirely. Bronze, the lifeblood of these workshops, was an alloy of copper and tin, sourced from distant mines in Cyprus or the distant Tin Islands, as the Greeks vaguely knew them. You can envision the raw ingots arriving in rough, disc-shaped forms, traded at ports like Piraeus. The smith would begin by melting these in a crucible over the forge, a process requiring precise control to avoid impurities that could weaken the final product. For helmets, the craftsmanship demanded exceptional finesse. The Corinthian type, one of the most iconic of the period, was hammered from a single sheet of bronze, starting as a flat disc and gradually shaped over a wooden fore or anvil. Hours of repetitive hammering thinned the metal to about 1 to 2 millimeters, creating a dome that enveloped the head, with extended cheek guards and a nasal piece for facial protection. Slits for the eyes and mouth were carefully cut and filed smooth, ensuring visibility and breath without compromising strength. Decorations, if any, were subtle, perhaps etched lines or embossed ridges mimicking hair or horsehair crests, added later with chisels. Shields or aspides presented their own set of challenges, blending metalwork with carpentry. The core was wooden, often from poplar or willow for its lightweight flexibility. Layered and glued into a convex disc about a meter in diameter, you would see the smith overlaying this with a thin bronze sheet riveted in place around the edges. And the central boss, a protruding dome of thicker bronze, was forged separately and attached to deflect blows. An armband, pawpacks, and hand grip antilobe of bronze strips allowed the warrior to carry the 7 to 9 kilogram shield comfortably, distributing weight across the forearm. Polishing came last, using abrasive stones and oils to achieve a gleam that, in sunlight, could intimidate foes from afar. These tasks unfolded in a routine as predictable as the tides. Dawn brought the stoking of fires, midday the heaviest labor, under the relentless sun filtering through reed roofs, and evenings the cooling and inspection of pieces. Apprentices, young boys learning the trade, swept ashes and fetched water, their hands calloused from years of such toil. Safety was rudimentary. Leather aprons protected against sparks, but burns and respiratory ailments were common hazards in this pre-industrial world. Yet, as you linger in this forge, observing the smith's methodical strikes, a question arises: who were the men destined to wear these creations? And how did the quiet precision of the workshop translate to the chaos of the battlefield? You stand now in the same archaic Greek smithy, the rhythmic clang of hammer on bronze filling the air, as you delve deeper into the lives of the craftsmen and the broader world that shaped their work. The Chorkais were not merely artisans, but vital cogs in the machinery of the Greek polis, their labor bridging the gap between raw resources and the hoplites' survival on the battlefield. In the 7th century BCE, city-states like Sparta, Corinth, and Athens were defining their identities through military organization, and the hoplite phalanx, a tight formation of citizen soldiers, was the backbone of their defense. The shields and helmets forged in these workshops were not just tools but symbols of civic duty, each piece carrying the weight of a community's survival. Consider the smith himself, perhaps a man named Cleon, his face weathered by years of heat and labor. He was likely born into the trade, apprenticed under his father or an uncle, learning to read the color of heated bronze yellow-white for the right forging temperature, dull red for cooling. His knowledge was practical, honed through trial and error, yet steeped in tradition. You can imagine him instructing his apprentice to maintain the bellow's steady rhythm, ensuring the fire stayed hot enough to work the metal without scorching it. The process was slow, deliberate. A single Corinthian helmet could take days to shape, requiring constant reheating and hammering to achieve the precise curvature that protected the skull while allowing peripheral vision. Errors were costly. A poorly forged helmet might crack under a spear's impact, dooming its wearer. Beyond the forge, the smithy was a nexus of local and regional networks. Bronze ingots arrived via trade routes, often bartered for olive oil or pottery at bustling ports. You might picture merchants haggling over tin, a scarce commodity that determined the alloy's quality. The smith had to understand metallurgy. Intuitively, too much tin made the bronze brittle, too little made it soft. For shields, the collaboration with carpenters was equally critical. The wooden core, layered for strength, was sourced from local forests, but the bronze facing required precise fitting. You can see the smith measuring the shield's curve with a practiced eye, ensuring the bronze adhered seamlessly to the wood. Rivets hammered flush to avoid snagging in combat. The craftsmen's lives were not isolated. They interacted with hoplites, who often commissioned custom pieces, visiting the smithy to discuss specifications. A wealthier citizen might request a shield emblazoned with his family's emblem, a boar or an owl, etched into the bronze. Poorer hoplites unable to afford such personalization relied on standard designs, their equipment often funded by the polis to ensure the phalanx's cohesion. You can envision the smith's pride in his work, knowing his shields would stand firm in the clash of armies, yet also his detachment once a piece left his forge. Its fate was no longer his to control. Socially, the Chalkeyes occupied a middling status. They were respected for their skill, but not revered like poets or generals. Their workshops, often family-run, doubled as homes, with wives and daughters managing household tasks nearby. The labor was grueling, with long hours bent over the anvil leading to chronic back pain or damaged lungs from inhaling fumes. Yet their role was indispensable, tying them to the polis's survival in ways few others could claim. As you watch Cleon polish a newly forged helmet, its surface gleaming like a small sun, you wonder, how did these meticulously crafted pieces fare when tested in the brutal reality of a hoplite battle? You now stand at the edge of a battlefield, the air thick with dust and the shouts of hoplites, as the shields and helmets crafted in the quiet smithies of archaic Greece face their ultimate test. It's the 7th century BCE, and the phalanx formation dominates warfare in city-states like Athens or Sparta. The bronze shields and helmets, forged with such care by men like Cleon, are no longer mere objects but lifelines in the chaos of combat. Their quality determines whether a hoplite returns home or falls beneath an enemy's spear. As you observe the clash, you see how the meticulous labor of the Chalkeyes translates into survival, and how their work shaped not just battles, but the very course of Greek history. Picture a hoplite, perhaps a farmer by trade, standing in the phalanx's front line. His Corinthian helmet, hammered thin yet resilient, absorbs a glancing blow from a spear, the bronze denting but not cracking. The helmet's design covering the face except for eye and mouth slits restricts his vision, but shields his skull, a trade-off born of the smith's careful calculations. His shield, the aspis, is locked with those of his comrades, forming an unbroken wall of wood and bronze. The central boss deflects an enemy thrust, while the armband distributes the shield's weight, allowing him to hold formation despite fatigue. You can almost feel the strain in his arm as he pushes forward, the phalanx moving as one, a testament to the smith's precision in balancing weight and durability. The battlefield reveals the true stakes of the smithy's work. A poorly forged shield could splinter under impact, exposing the hoplite to a fatal strike. A helmet too heavy might slow its wearer, making him an easy target. Yet, when crafted, well, these pieces enabled the phalanx to function as a disciplined unit, turning citizen soldiers into a formidable force. The Battle of Hysia in 669 BCE, for example, saw Argos defeat Sparta, partly due to superior equipment that held firm under pressure. You can imagine the pride of a smith hearing that his shields withstood the enemy's onslaught, though he'd likely never know the full extent of his contribution beyond the battlefield. The Chalkeyes' work had lasting ripples. Their shields and helmets, often buried with fallen warriors or dedicated in temples like Olympia, became symbols of civic identity and martial valor. Excavations at sites like Corinth reveal bronze fragments etched with dedications, hinting at the personal stories behind each piece. The craftsmanship also spurred economic activity, as demand for bronze fueled trade networks across the Mediterranean. Yet, the smiths themselves remained in the shadows, their names rarely recorded, their lives defined by repetitive labor rather than glory. Reflecting on this, you see how the quiet diligence of these craftsmen underpinned the rise of the Greek polis. Their work, though mundane, enabled the survival of communities and the defense of ideals like democracy in Athens. Today, we might draw parallels to the unsung labor behind modern infrastructure, engineers, mechanics, or coders whose efforts sustain society unnoticed. The archaic smithy reminds us that history's grand moments often rest on the steady hands of ordinary people. As the battle dust settles, one question lingers. What other forgotten trades shaped the ancient world in equally profound ways? Echoes of Moirae in medieval feudal oaths, binding fates across Irostep into a dimly lit hall. In 12th century England, where the air carries the scent of damp stone and burning tallow candles, you are witnessing a solemn ceremony not of kings or battles, but of a vassal swearing an oath of fealty to his lord. A ritual as binding as the threads of fate spun by the ancient Greek Moirae. In medieval Europe, these oaths were the glue of feudal society, stitching together lords, knights, and serfs in a web of mutual obligations. Yet, their roots stretch back to the ancient concept of Moira, the personified fates of Greek mythology, who wove, measured, and cut the threads of human destiny. This connection, subtle but profound, reveals how ideas of duty and destiny persisted across centuries, shaping lives in ways both grand and mundane. The feudal oath, often sworn on holy relics or a Bible, was a public act, performed in a lord's hall before witnesses. Picture a knight, clad in a simple tunic, kneeling before his lord, hands clasped within his lord's as he recites words that pledge loyalty, military service, and counsel. The lord, in turn, promises protection and land fiefs that sustain the vassal's livelihood. These ceremonies, common from the 9th to 14th centuries, were not mere formalities but sacred contracts believed to be overseen by divine forces. You can almost hear the murmured Latin of the oath, Homagium or Fidelitas, echoing through the hall, its cadence carrying the weight of survival in a fragmented world. In ancient Greece, the Moirae, Clatho, Lachesis, and Atropos represented an unyielding cosmic order. Clatho spun the thread of life, Lachesis measured its length, and Atropos cut it, determining each person's fate. This belief permeated Greek culture, from epic tales like the Iliad to the daily lives of farmers, who offered sacrifices to appease these forces. By the medieval period, Christian theology had supplanted pagan gods, but the idea of a predetermined path lingered. You might imagine a vassal, aware of his place in the feudal hierarchy, feeling a distant echo of Moira in his oath, a sense that his life's course was tied to forces beyond his control, whether divine will or the lord's authority. The feudal system itself was a tapestry of interdependence. Lords relied on vassals for military support, while vassals depended on lords for land and security. Serfs bound to the land toiled to sustain this structure, their lives dictated by obligations as rigid as any mythic fate. Historical records, like the Domesday Book of 1086, detail the meticulous accounting of these relationships, land holdings, knightly services, even the number of oxen owed. You can envision scribes in candlelit scriptoria, recording these odes, their quills scratching parchment to preserve the delicate balance of power. Yet, these odes were not without tension. A vassal's loyalty could be tested by rival lords or personal ambition, just as the Greeks believed mortals could defy the Moirae, only to face dire consequences. The ceremony you witness is calm, but beneath it lies a question. Could a single, broken oath unravel the fragile threads of feudal society, much like a mortal challenging the fates? You remain in the 12th century hall, the oath of fealty still resonating as the vassal rises, his bond to the lord sealed. The concept of Moirae, the Greek fates, lingers in the air not as a myth, but as a framework for understanding the rigid obligations that governed medieval life. The feudal oath was more than a promise. It was a lifeline in a world of constant threats, Viking raids, local wars, and the ever-present risk of famine. You can sense the weight of this system, where every individual, from lord to serf, was bound by a web of duties that echoed the inescapable threads of destiny spun by Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos. The vassal's life was defined by his oath. He owed his lord auxilium, military aid, and consilium counsel, often requiring him to maintain horses, armor, and men at his own expense. A knight might spend months preparing for a campaign, ensuring his equipment was ready, much like a Greek hero consulting oracles before battle. You can picture him inspecting his chainmail, forged by a local smith, or training with his squire in a muddy field, his mind heavy with the knowledge that failure to uphold his oath could mean loss of land or honor. The lord, too, was bound, obligated to protect his vassal from external threats and provide justice in disputes. This mutual dependence mirrored the Greek understanding of Moirae as a force that tied all beings to a shared cosmic order. Feudal records, like those from the Anglo-Norman period, revealed the complexity of these obligations. Charters and cartularies collections of legal documents list precise terms. A vassal might owe 40 days of military service annually, or a portion of his harvest. You might imagine a scribe in a monastery meticulously copying these agreements, ensuring no detail was lost. These documents were the threads that held the feudal tapestry together, much like Lachesis measuring the length of a life's thread. Disputes over these terms were common, resolved in courts where vassals swore additional oaths to affirm their loyalty or defend their claims. The influence of Moirae also appeared in the spiritual dimension of these oaths. Medieval Christians believed their promises were sanctified by God, much as Greeks saw fate as divinely ordained. A vassal breaking his oath risked not only earthly punishment, seizure of land, or exile, but divine retribution. Chronicles like those of Aldrich Vitalis recount tales of knights struck down by illness or misfortune after betraying their lords. Stories that echoed Greek myths of hubris. You can envision a priest in the hall, blessing the oath with a sprinkle of holy water, reinforcing its sacred weight. Yet, the feudal system was not as rigid as it seemed. Vassals sometimes held fiefs from multiple lords, creating conflicting loyalties. A knight might swear fealty to one lord for land in Normandy and another for land in England, a situation ripe for betrayal. The tension between personal ambition and duty recalls Greek tragedies where mortals wrestled with their fated paths. As you watch the vassal depart the hall, his new obligations binding him like an unseen thread, you wonder, how did these men navigate the tangled loyalties of their oaths without tearing their world apart? You stand now at the crossroads of history, where the echoes of Moirae and the feudal oath converge in moments of crisis that tested the bonds of medieval society. The 12th century world you've entered was fragile, its stability resting on the oaths sworn in candlelit halls. When these promises held, They sustained order when they broke. They unleashed chaos akin to a thread cut by Atropos. The feudal system, with its intricate web of loyalties, was both a strength and a vulnerability. And you can see how its unraveling reshaped Europe, carrying lessons that resonate even today. Consider the anarchy of England 1135 to 1154, a civil war sparked by broken oaths. When King Henry I died, his daughter Matilda and nephew Stephen both claimed the throne, fracturing the loyalties of vassals. You can picture knights torn between lords, their oaths pulling them in opposing directions. Some, like Robert of Gloucester, switched allegiances, citing higher duties to family or justice, while others clung to their original vows, risking everything. Chronicles, such as the jester Stephanie, described the devastation: castles burned, harvests destroyed as vassals. Conflicting oaths tore the land apart. This mirrors Greek tales of fate's retribution, where defying Moirae brought ruin, as when Agamemnon's choices led to his downfall. The resolution of such conflicts often required new oaths, or arbitration. The Treaty of Wallingford in 1153, ending the anarchy, saw Stephen and Matilda's son Henry swear mutual oaths to restore peace, reaffirming the feudal system's reliance on trust. You can envision the ceremony, tense yet hopeful, as lords and vassals recommitted to a shared order, their words binding them like lattices measuring a new thread of destiny. Yet, these resolutions were imperfect. Oaths could be coerced or insincere, and the system's rigidity stifled social mobility, leaving serfs and lesser knights with little agency, their lives as fixed as a Greek mortal's fate. The legacy of feudal oaths extended beyond the Middle Ages. They fostered a culture of contractual obligation that influenced modern legal systems, from property law to international treaties. You might reflect on how today's contracts, business agreements, or employment terms echo the mutual duties of lord and vassal, though without the sacred weight. The idea of Moirae, too, persists in our fascination with destiny, whether in literature or personal beliefs about life's path. The feudal oath, like the Greek fates, reminds us that human societies thrive on trust and obligation, yet falter when these bonds fray. As you leave the medieval hall, the weight of these oaths lingers. They were mundane promises, spoken in formulaic Latin, yet they held the power to build or break empires. The chalk eyes of Story 7 forged shields for physical battles. Here, scribes and lords wove oaths for social ones. Both were acts of creation, binding individuals to a larger whole. Today, we might ask, in a world of fleeting commitments, what oaths, spoken or unspoken, still hold us together, and what happens when they, too, are tested? Achilles' camp life. Mundane logistics behind the rage you find yourself amidst the sprawling Greek encampment on the Trojan plain around 1200 BCE, as the Trojan War drags into its 9th year. The air is thick with the scent of salt from the nearby sea, mingled with smoke from countless cooking fires. This is no scene of heroic combat, but the everyday grind of Achilles' camp, where the legendary warrior of Homer's Iliad lived. Alongside his Myrmidon soldiers, far from the clash of bronze, you witness the quiet, essential logistics that sustained the Achaean army, tasks so mundane they're rarely sung, yet critical to the war's survival. Here, the rage of Achilles, so central to the epic, is grounded in the ordinary rhythms of camp life, revealing the human effort behind the myth. The Greek camp, stretching along the Hellespont, housed thousands of men in makeshift shelters, tents of leather or woven cloth, or huts built from driftwood and reeds. Achilles' quarters, as described in the Iliad, were modest yet distinct, a sturdy hut near his black-hulled ships, surrounded by his loyal Myrmidons. You can picture him pacing outside, his armor gleaming but unused during his infamous withdrawal from battle over a dispute with Agamemnon. Yet, even in his rage, the camp's daily needs continued: food, water, and supplies had to be secured for hundreds of men, a task falling to lesser-known figures: cooks, foragers, and quartermasters who toiled in the shadows, provisioning. The army was a relentless challenge. You might imagine ox-drawn carts rumbling in from the hinterlands, laden with barley, dried fish, and wine amphorae traded from nearby islands like Lemnos. The Iliad hints at such logistics, mentioning raids on nearby towns for livestock and grain. Foragers scoured the Trojan countryside, risking ambushes to gather olives or wild herbs, while fishermen cast nets in the Scamander River. Cooking was communal, with men gathered around fires to boil grain into porridge or roast mutton on spits. You can almost smell the charred meat and hear the crackle of flames as slaves or low-ranking soldiers stirred cauldrons, their hands calloused from endless labor. Sanitation was another concern. With thousands crowded together, waste management was critical to prevent disease. Latrines were dug at the camp's edges and refuse bones, broken pottery was buried or burned. Water, drawn from springs or the river, was stored in clay jars, but contamination was a constant risk. You might see a soldier scrubbing his bronze greaves with sand, or another mending a torn cloak. Tasks that kept the camp functional. Achilles himself, though a hero, was not above such realities. The Iliad describes him hosting guests with food, prepared by his men, suggesting his involvement in the camp's daily rhythm. These logistics, dull but vital, sustained the war's momentum. Without them, Achilles' rage would have been irrelevant, his army starved or sickened. Yet, as you watch a Myrmidon stack firewood under the relentless sun, a question emerges: how did these mundane routines shape the morale and decisions of a warrior like Achilles? Poised on the edge of rejoining the fray, you linger in Achilles' camp, the Trojan War's 9th year stretching on, with the rhythmic clatter of daily tasks filling the air. The Iliad paints Achilles as a figure of divine rage, but here you see the humdrum realities that tethered even a hero to the earth. The logistics of camp life, food, shelter, sanitation were not just background noise, but the scaffolding of the Achaean war effort. These routines shaped the morale of Achilles' Myrmidons and influenced his own choices, as the camp's survival depended on a delicate balance of discipline, resourcefulness, and camaraderie amidst the grind of a decade-long siege. Maintaining morale was as critical as securing supplies. You can envision the Myrmidons, hardened warriors from Phthia, gathered around fires at dusk, sharing stories of home while singing hymns to Apollo for protection. The Iliad mentions such moments, where men played lyres or competed in foot races, to break the monotony. Achilles himself, described as playing a lyre in his hut, likely used these activities to bond with his men, reinforcing their loyalty during his withdrawal from battle. You might see a soldier sharpening his spear with a whetstone, or another weaving a basket from reeds to store grain, small acts that kept the camp cohesive. These tasks, though tedious, fostered a sense of purpose, countering the despair of a prolonged war. Resource management required ingenuity. The camp relied on raids and trade, but supplies were inconsistent. You can picture foragers returning with sacks of barley or baskets of figs, their hauls distributed by quartermasters who tallied every bushel. The Iliad notes Achilles' men capturing livestock from Trojan allies, a risky but necessary endeavor. Water, too, was a constant concern. The Scamander River was nearby, but its banks were contested, forcing soldiers to fetch water under guard. You might imagine a young Myrmidon hauling a heavy amphora, his brow furrowed as he navigates Trojan scouts. Waste disposal, meanwhile, demanded vigilance. Latrines were relocated regularly to avoid fouling the camp, and refuse pits were dug deep to deter vermin. These tasks fell to slaves or low-ranking soldiers whose labor was as vital as any. Warriors, Achilles' role in this system was subtle but significant. As a leader, he oversaw his camp's operations, ensuring his men were fed and sheltered. The Iliad describes him hosting feasts, suggesting he coordinated with quartermasters to secure provisions. His companion Patroclus, a key figure in the epic, likely managed many of these details, acting as a bridge between Achilles and the rank and file. You can see Patroclus inspecting a cart of grain, or calming a dispute over rations, his practicality, grounding Achilles' volatile emotions. Yet, the camp's routines also amplified tensions. Achilles' refusal to fight strained his men's morale, as they faced idleness while others battled. The Iliad hints at their frustration, loyal yet restless. The camp's survival depended on Achilles' eventual return, but his rage isolated him, creating a rift. as you watch a myrmidon mend a torn sandal by firelight. You wonder, how did these daily struggles influence Achilles' decision to re-enter the war? And what role did Patroclus play in bridging that divide? You stand now at the heart of Achilles' camp, the Trojan War nearing its climax, as the mundane logistics of survival collide with the epic drama of the Iliad. The camp's routines, food, sanitation, morale have sustained the Myrmidons through years of siege, but Achilles' rage has pushed them to the brink. His refusal to fight, sparked by Agamemnon's slight, has left his men idle, their loyalty tested by the grind of camp life. Yet it is here, amidst the ordinary, that the seeds of Achilles' return to battle are sown, driven by the death of Patroclus and the unspoken weight of the camp's struggles. These logistics, so easily overlooked, shaped the war's turning point and its lasting legacy. Patroclus, Achilles' closest companion, was the linchpin of the camp's operations. The Iliad shows him as a caretaker, organizing feasts and tending. To the wounded, his pragmatism balancing Achilles' brooding. You can picture him distributing rations, ensuring the Myrmidons had enough barley and wine, or overseeing the repair of a damaged ship. His death, fighting in Achilles' armor to rally the Greeks, was a direct result of the camp's strained morale. Patroclus stepped into battle to fill the void left by Achilles' absence. The loss shattered Achilles, pulling him back to the war with a vengeance. You might imagine the camp's silence as news of Patroclus' death spread. Fires untended, the daily routines halted by grief. The logistics of the camp also influenced the broader war. Archaeological evidence from Mycenaean sites, like those near Troy, suggests the Greeks maintained supply lines across the Aegean, with ships bringing pottery, oil, and grain. These efforts, mirrored in the Iliad's accounts of raids, kept the army fed but stretched resources thin. Achilles' return, fueled by rage and loss, relied on this foundation. His men, though weary, were battle-ready thanks to years of disciplined provisioning. The Iliad describes Achilles' rampage after Patroclus' death, his bronze armor gleaming, a product of the same supply chains that fed his camp. Without the foragers, cooks, and quartermasters, his vengeance would have faltered. The legacy of Achilles' camp life extends beyond the epic. It highlights the resilience of ordinary people, slaves, foragers, soldiers whose labor underpinned heroic deeds. The Iliad immortalizes Achilles, but the camp's unsung workers were the war's true backbone. Their efforts resonate in modern militaries where logistics, supply chains, sanitation, morale remain critical. You might reflect on how today's essential workers, from warehouse staff to medics, mirror these ancient roles, sustaining society in crises. Achilles' story, stripped of its divine gloss, reveals a truth. Even heroes depend on the mundane. As you leave the camp, the fires dimming under a starlit sky, you see the weight of these small tasks in shaping history. The chalk eyes of story, 7 forged weapons, the scribes of story, 8 wove odes. Here, nameless workers sustained a war. Their efforts, like Achilles' rage, were fleeting but eternal in their impact. What other quiet labors, you might ask, lie hidden behind the myths and battles that define our past? The weaving of destinies, spinners and looms in ancient households saw you step into a modest home. In 5th century BCE Athens, where the soft hum of a loom fills the air, mingling with the scent of wool and olive oil. This is no grand palace, but the heart of an ordinary household, where women, mothers, daughters, slaves wove cloth that clothed families and sustained economies. In ancient Greece, weaving was more than a domestic chore. It was a craft imbued with symbolic power, echoing the work of the Moirae, the fates who spun, measured, and cut the threads of human destiny. Here, in the quiet rhythm of the loom, you see the unsung labor of women shaping not just fabric, but the very fabric of society. Their work as vital as any warriors. The household's weaving took place in the Ginekon, the women's quarters, a sunlit courtyard or small room where the upright loom stood. Picture a wooden frame, its vertical warp threads stretched taut by clay or stone weights, each dangling like a pendulum. The weaver, perhaps a woman named Irene, moved the shuttleless smooth wooden stick through the warp, threading the weft. To create cloth, wool, the most common fiber was sourced from local sheep, cleaned, carded. and spun into yarn using a spindle, a process that could take days for a single garment. You can imagine Irenae's hands, calloused yet precise, guiding the yarn. Her movements repetitive but skilled, learned from childhood under her mother's watchful eye. Weaving was a cornerstone of the oikos, the Greek household economy. Cloth was not just for clothing but for sales, bedding, and trade goods. Historical records, like inscriptions from Athens, show households producing textiles for markets. With surplus cloth traded for grain or pottery, you might see a slave girl spinning, wool in the corner, her spindle twirling as she prepares yarn for her mistress. The process was labor-intensive. A single tunic or chiton required hours of spinning, dyeing with madder or saffron and weaving, followed by sewing with bone needles. Patterns were simple checks or stripes but skilled weavers could create. Intricate borders, admired in assemblies or festivals, this work carried cultural weight. In the Odyssey, Penelope's weaving and unraveling her work each night to delay suitors symbolized cunning and loyalty. Similarly, the Moirae's threads of fate were a metaphor woven into Greek thought, linking mortal lives to divine order. You can envision Erin pausing to offer a prayer to Athena, goddess of weaving, her loom a sacred space where human skill met cosmic destiny. Yet, the reality was grueling. Women worked long hours, their backs aching from standing at the loom, their eyes straining in dim light. Slaves, often captives from wars, faced harsher conditions, their labor unacknowledged. The cloth produced was a lifeline, clothing families against the cold and signaling status through quality or color. But as you watch Erin beat the weft into place with a wooden comb, a question lingers. How did this quiet, repetitive work influence the women's lives and the broader Greek world beyond the household walls? You remain in the gynekon of the Athenian household, the steady clack of Irenae's loom weaving a thread of continuity. Through the daily life of 5th century BCE Greece, the act of weaving, so central to the oikos, was not just a practical necessity, but a reflection of the interconnected roles women played in society. As you watch Erin guide the shuttle, her fingers deft despite hours of labor, you see how this craft bound together households, economies, and even the mythic imagery of fate. The Moirae's threads, spun by Clotho, measured by Lachesis, and cut by Atropos, found their echo in the warp and weft of every cloth. Each piece a testament to resilience and skill. Weaving was a communal effort, often involving the entire household. You can picture Irenae's daughter, perhaps 10 years old, learning to spin wool with a drop spindle. Her small hands struggling to mimic her mother's rhythm. Slaves, too, were integral, carding wool or dyeing it with plant-based hues madder. For red, wove for blue, these dyes, prepared in clay vats, filled the air with earthy scents. A process as meticulous as the weaving itself. Archaeological finds like loom weights from Olynthus show the scale of this work, with dozens of weights per household suggesting multiple looms in use. A single homation, a heavy cloak, could require weeks of preparation, its value measured, not just in utility but in the labor it represented. The economic impact of weaving extended beyond the home. You might imagine Irenae's surplus cloth, perhaps a finely woven shawl carried to the agora, where it was bartered for oil or grain. Athenian inscriptions record women's contributions to temple inventories, with textiles offered to Athena during festivals like the Panathenaea. These gifts, often embroidered with scenes of myth, were not mere decorations but symbols of civic pride, linking household labor to the polis's identity. Yet, the women themselves remained largely invisible, their names rarely recorded unless they were of elite status, like priestesses or the wives of prominent citizens. The symbolic resonance of weaving was profound. The Moirae's mythology imbued the craft with a sense of destiny, as if each thread wove a family's future. In the Iliad, Helen weaves a tapestry depicting the Trojan War, her work a mirror to the conflict outside. You can see Erin pausing to teach her daughter a prayer to Athena, reinforcing the sacred nature of their task. Yet, the physical toll was undeniable. Long hours at the loom caused back pain, and dim light strained eyes. For slaves, the work was relentless, their contributions uncelebrated despite their skill. Weaving also offered women a rare space for agency. Through their cloth, They expressed creativity, choosing patterns or colors that reflected their household's identity. In a society where women were confined to the oikos, this was a quiet rebellion, a way to leave a mark. As you watch Irenae's shuttle glide, creating a pattern of interlocking threads, you wonder, how did this craft, so rooted in the home, ripple outward to shape the social and economic fabric of Greece? You stand now in the Gynekon, the loom's rhythm fading as Irene inspects her finished cloth, a chiton ready to clothe her family or be traded in the Agra. In 5th century BC Athens, this act of weaving, so steeped in the imagery of the Moirae, was more than a domestic task. It was a force that wove together the social, economic, and cultural threads of Greek life. The labor of women like Irene, though often unrecorded, underpinned the polis's stability, their looms producing not just fabric, but a legacy that resonated across centuries. As you watch her work, you see how their quiet work shaped history, much like the fates themselves. The broader impact of weaving was profound. Textiles were a currency of survival, clothing households and fueling trade. Excavations at sites like Corinth reveal amphorae used to transport textiles, evidence of their role in Mediterranean commerce. You can imagine Irenae's cloth, perhaps, dyed a rich purple, bartered for Attic pottery or Thracian wine, linking her oikos to distant markets. During festivals like the Panathenaea, women's textiles were presented to Athena, their craftsmanship celebrated in sacred spaces. These offerings, often woven with mythic scenes like Athena's battle with Arachne, reinforced the cultural tie between weaving and destiny, elevating the women's work to a civic act. Yet, the women's lives were shaped by their labors, constraints. Free women like Irene had some agency, their textiles a source of pride, but slaves faced endless toil, their contributions erased from history. The Odyssey's Penelope used weaving to delay suitors, a rare act of defiance. Most women, however, wove in obscurity, their health worn by repetitive strain. You can picture Irene teaching her daughter to weave, passing down skills that ensured the oikos' survival, yet also binding them to a life of labor. The Moirae's metaphor was apt. Women's threads, like fate, were both creative and confining. This legacy endures. Weaving shaped Greek society by sustaining households and economies, much as the chalk eyes of Story 7 armed warriors or the odes of Story 8 bound vassals. Today, the craft echoes in artisanal traditions where handwoven textiles carry cultural weight, or in industrial production where machines have replaced the loom's slow rhythm. You might reflect on how modern labor factory workers, programmers, mirrors this balance of creation and toil, shaping society in unseen ways. Irenae's loom, like the Moirae's spindle, wove a world where individual efforts, however mundane, held collective power. As you leave the Gynekon, the cloth folded neatly. You see the quiet strength of these women, their work, like Achilles. Camp logistics in Story 9 was the unseen foundation of greatness. Their threads, spun with care, clothed a civilization and wove its destiny. What other overlooked labors, you might ask, continue to shape our world, their makers as vital yet as invisible as the weavers of old? Knightly armor evolution, influences from classical Greek desik and show, stand in a 13th century European armorer's workshop, the air heavy with the clang of hammers and the tang of heated iron. It's a world apart from the bronze smiths of archaic Greece. Yet as you watch a craftsman shape a steel breastplate, you sense a distant echo of the chalk eyes who forged hoplite armor centuries earlier. The evolution of knightly armor in the Middle Ages, particularly from the 11th to 14th centuries, owes a subtle but significant debt to classical Greek designs. These ancient techniques, preserved through trade, texts, and cultural memory, shaped the protective gear that defined medieval warfare, blending practicality with the legacy of a long-lost Herodot in the 5th century BCE. Greek hoplites wore bronze armor helmets, like the Corinthian type, and muscle cuirasses that mimicked the human torso. These were crafted to balance mobility and protection in the phalanx, where soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder. You can picture a Greek smith hammering a single bronze sheet into a helmet, its sleek curves deflecting blows while allowing breath through narrow slits. Fast forward to the medieval period, and the knight's armor, though now made of iron or steel, carried traces of this ingenuity. The early medieval spangen helm, a conical helmet with a nasal guard, mirrored the Greek emphasis on facial protection and visibility, adapted for the mounted combat of knights. The armorer's workshop you're in is a hive of activity, not unlike the Greek smithy of Story 7. Here, craftsmen use water-powered hammers and bellows to forge steel plates, a technological leap from bronze, but the principles remain familiar. A knight's breastplate, like the Greek cuirass, is shaped to fit the body, its curves designed to glance off sword strikes or lance thrusts. You might see an armorer measuring a knight for a custom cuirass, ensuring it fits snugly over a padded gambeson, much as Greek smiths tailored armor to hoplites. Chainmail or hauberk dominates this era, but plate armor is emerging, inspired partly by classical designs seen in Roman statues or Byzantine artifacts traded across the Mediterranean. Trade and conquest carried Greek influences to Europe. The Crusades 1095 to 1291 exposed European smiths to Byzantine armor, which preserved Greek techniques like articulated joints and layered defenses. You can imagine a crusader returning with a captured helmet, its design studied by local armorers. Manuscripts, like those in monastic libraries, also preserve descriptions of ancient armor, with scholars translating Greek texts that detailed hoplite gear. These ideas filtered into workshops, where smiths experimented with steel to replicate the fitted, protective qualities of bronze cuirasses. The knight's armor, like the hoplites, was a status symbol as much as a tool. A polished breastplate, gleaming in torchlight, signaled wealth and prowess, much like the burnished bronze of a Greek warrior. Yet, the labor was grueling. Smiths worked long hours, their hands scarred from forge burns. As you watch the armorer hammer a steel plate, you wonder, how did these classical influences evolve in the hands of medieval craftsmen? And what challenges did they face adapting ancient designs to a new age of warfare? You remain in the 13th century armorer's workshop, the glow of the forge casting flickering shadows as craftsmen shape steel into knightly armor. The echoes of classical Greek designs, seen in the fitted curves of hoplite cuirasses and helmets, linger in the techniques used here. But adapting these ancient ideas to medieval warfare was no simple task. The shift from bronze to steel, the rise of mounted combat, and the evolving threats of crossbows and lances demanded innovation. Yet the Greek principles of balance, protection, and mobility guided armorers. As you watch a smith rivet a steel pauldron, you see how this blend of old and new defined the knight's world. A testament to human ingenuity across centuries, the Greek hoplite's armor, designed for the phalanx, prioritized lightweight protection. The bronze cuirass, molded to the torso, allowed soldiers to stand firm in tight formations, while the Corinthian helmet shielded the face without sacrificing awareness. You can envision medieval armorers inspired by these designs through Byzantine or Roman artifacts, striving to replicate this balance. The spangen helm, used from the 6th to 11th centuries, evolved into the great helm by the 13th century, a steel cylinder enclosing the head, much like the Greek helmet's protective dome. You might see an armorer hammering a helm's visor in shoring. It could be lifted for ventilation, a nod to the Greek focus on breathability in combat. Steel, unlike bronze, allowed for stronger, thinner plates, but its forging was complex. You can picture the armorer heating iron with carbon in a crucible, a process requiring precise control to avoid brittleness. Water-powered trip hammers, a medieval innovation, pounded steel into plates, but shaping them to fit the body echoed Greek techniques. The emerging plate armor, like the cuirass or folds protecting the hips, was tailored to deflect blows, a principle seen in the angled surfaces of Greek muscle cuirasses. Archaeological finds, like armor fragments from Visby 1361, show early plate designs with articulated joints, likely inspired by Byzantine armor encountered during the Crusades, which preserved Greek methods of flexibility. The challenges were significant. Steel was heavier than bronze, and knights, unlike hoplites, fought on horseback, requiring armor that balanced protection with mobility. You might imagine a knight testing a new breastplate, its weight straining his shoulders, prompting the armorer to thin the steel or add padding. Crossbows, capable of piercing chainmail, pushed armorers to develop thicker plates, a departure from the Greek reliance on lighter bronze. Yet, the Greek influence persisted in the emphasis on form-fitting designs, seen in the knight's cuirass, which hugged the torso to distribute weight, much like a hoplite's armor. Socially, armorers were vital but undervalued, much like the chalk-eyes of Story 7. Their workshops, often in urban centers like Milan or Toledo, buzzed with apprentices, learning to forge and rivet. The cost of armor, sometimes equivalent to a year's harvest, made it a luxury, reserved for wealthy knights, echoing the elite status of hoplite gear. As you watch the armorer polish a gleaming helm, you wonder, how did these evolving designs shape the battlefield, and what did they mean for the knights who wore them? You now stand on a 14th century battlefield, where knights clad in gleaming plate armor charge on horseback, their steel reflecting the sun like the bronze of ancient hoplites. The evolution of knightly armor, influenced by classical Greek designs, has reached a peak, transforming warfare and the knight's role in it. The principles of fit, deflection and mobility, rooted in the Greek phalanx, had been adapted to meet the demands of medieval combat, creating a legacy that bridges ancient and modern worlds. As you watch a knight's lance strike an opponent's breastplate, glancing harmlessly off its curved surface, you see how the armorer's craft, steeped in Greek echoes, decided life and death. By the 14th century, plate armor had largely replaced chainmail, a shift driven by new weapons like the longbow and crossbow. You can envision a knight in a full harness breastplate, pauldrons, and greaves, its articulated joints allowing him to swing a sword while deflecting arrows. A direct descendant of the Greek cuirass's flexibility, the great helm, now with a hinged visor, echoes the Corinthian helmet's balance of protection and visibility, allowing knights to breathe in the chaos of a melee. Battles like Crecy 1346 showed the limits of armor as arrows pierced weaker joints, but also its strengths as well-fitted plates saved countless lives. The Greek influence, carried through Byzantine and Roman artifacts, was refined in workshops across Europe. You might imagine armorers in Milan studying a Byzantine lamella coat, its overlapping scales inspiring the articulated plates of a cuirass. Manuscripts, like translations of Vitruvius, provided technical insights into ancient armor, guiding smiths to craft steel that was both strong and light. This fusion of old and new allowed knights to dominate battlefields, their armor a symbol of status and survival, much like the hoplite's bronze in Story 7. Yet, the weight of full plate, often 20 to 30 kilograms, required knights to train relentlessly, their bodies adapting to the strain, just as hoplites drilled for the phalanx. The social impact was profound. Armorers, though rarely celebrated, were linchpins of medieval society, their workshops fueling economies in cities like Nuremberg. The cost of armor reinforced feudal hierarchies, as only wealthy lords could afford full harnesses, mirroring the elite hoplite class. You can picture a knight donning his armor, each piece a testament to the armorer's skill and the Greek legacy of form-fitting design. The Crusades and trade ensured this knowledge spread, linking Europe to its classical past. Today, the legacy of knightly armor lives in modern protective gear, Kevlar vests, riot shields where fit and deflection remain key, the chalk eyes of Story 7, the weavers of Story 10, and now the armorers show how mundane crafts shape history's grand moments. As you leave the battlefield, the knight's armor gleaming amidst the dust, you reflect, what other ancient techniques, quietly adapted, continue to protect and define our world? Prophecies and plague management in ancient Thebes. You stand in the shadow of the Cadmea, the citadel of Thebes, around 1200 BCE, where the air carries the weight of fear and the faint stench of sickness. The city, famed in myth for Oedipus and the Seven against Thebes, faces a crisis not of war but of plague, a silent scourge that empties homes and fills graves. In ancient Greece, plagues were seen as divine punishment, and Thebes, with its rich tradition of oracles and seers, turned to prophecies to understand and manage these crises. You are not witnessing the grand battles of epic tales, but the quiet, desperate efforts of priests, healers and citizens to survive, their actions shaped by a belief in fate and divine will. Thebes, a powerful Mycenaean city, was a hub of religious and political life, its streets lined with stone houses and bustling markets. But now, you see a city subdued, its people avoiding contact, their faces marked by worry. The plague, perhaps akin to the diseases described in later Greek texts like Thucydides' account of the Athenian plague, struck indiscriminately fever, sores, and weakness felling young and old. Historical evidence from Hittite and Egyptian records of the period suggests epidemics were common, spread by trade routes or armies. You can picture merchants from Crete or Mycenae unwittingly carrying disease to Thebes, their goods tainted by unseen pathogens. In this era, plagues were interpreted through a spiritual lens. The Iliad and Oedipus Rex depict Apollo as the bringer of pestilence, his arrows striking those who offended the gods. You might see a Theban priest, robed in white, offering sacrifices at a temple altar, burning thyme and laurel to appease Apollo. Oracles, like those at Delphi, were consulted for guidance, their cryptic pronouncements shaping the city's response. A seer might declare the plague a punishment for a forgotten rite, or a king's hubris urging purification rituals. You can envision citizens gathering at the temple, clutching offerings of grain or small figurines, their prayers rising with the smoke. Practical measures, the rudimentary, were also taken. You might observe healers, often women, boiling herbs like sage or myrtle in clay pots, creating infusions to ease fevers. Quarantine was intuitive. Sick families were isolated in their homes, their doors marked with charcoal to warn others. Corpses were burned or buried outside the city walls to prevent contagion, a practice echoed in later Greek records. Leaders, advised by priests, organized communal efforts cleaning wells, clearing refuse to stem the disease's spread. These tasks, though mundane, were acts of resilience, binding the community in shared survival. Yet, the reliance on prophecies brought tension. Oracles were vague, and their interpretations sparked debate. A seer's call for a scapegoat of Pharmacus to be exiled or sacrificed could divide the city, pitting fear against fairness. As you watch a priest interpret a prophecy under the flickering light of torches, you wonder, how did Thebes balance the divine guidance of oracles with the practical demands of managing a plague? You remain in Thebes, the plague's shadow deepening as the city grapples with its unseen enemy. The interplay of prophecies and practical measures defines this crisis, as Thebans navigate a world where divine will, as interpreted by oracles, shapes their survival strategies. The belief in Apollo's wrath, so vivid in myths like Oedipus Rex, drives the city's response. But it is the quiet work of healers, priests, and citizens cleaning, isolating, healing that keeps Thebes alive. You see a community bound by faith and necessity, their efforts echoing the fatalistic resolve of the Moirae's threads, yet challenged by the limits of their knowledge and resources. The role of oracles was central. You can picture a delegation returning from Delphi, bearing a prophecy scrawled on papyrus or etched in memory, perhaps a call to purify the city, or honor a neglected god. In Oedipus Rex, the oracle's revelation of a curse tied to Oedipus. Action spurred action. Here, similar pronouncements guided Thebes. Priests, acting as intermediaries, organized rituals processions through the streets, offerings of goats or barley at Apollo's temple. You might see a priestess pouring libations of wine, her voice chanting hymns to soothe the god's anger. These acts, recorded in later Greek inscriptions, were believed to restore divine favor, but their success was uncertain, fueling anxiety. Practical efforts, though, were equally vital. Healers, often women of the oikos, used herbal knowledge passed down through generations. You can envision a healer named Mycenaean crushing garlic and willow bark in a mortar, creating poultices to reduce fever, or brewing teas from thyme to ease coughing. Archaeological finds, like medicinal jars from Mycenaean sites, suggest such remedies were common, though their efficacy was limited against rampant disease. Quarantine measures grew stricter, infected households were marked and healthy. Citizens avoided markets. You might see a man piling refuse outside the city, sweat on his brow as he labors to keep wells clean, a task overseen by magistrates to prevent contamination. The community's resilience shown in these efforts. Families shared resources, bartering grain for herbs or cloth for water jars. Leaders, advised by seers, coordinated burial teams to handle the dead, ensuring bodies were cremated swiftly to curb infection. These acts, though unglamorous, mirrored the communal spirit of Achilles' camp in Story 9, where logistics sustained survival. Yet, the reliance on prophecies created friction. A call for a pharmacosa human scapegoat to be driven out could spark outrage. You can imagine citizens debating in the agora, torn between fear of divine wrath and the morality of sacrifice. The plague tested Thebes' social fabric, revealing both unity and division. Priests held sway, but healers and laborers were the unsung heroes, their work grounding the city's hopes. As you watch Mycenaean tend a fevered child, her hands steady despite her own exhaustion, you wonder, how did these combined efforts, spiritual and practical, shape Thebes' survival? And what happened when prophecy and reality clashed? You stand, now in the heart of Thebes, the plague's grip loosening as the city emerges from its ordeal. The interplay of prophecies and practical measures has shaped the outcome, revealing the resilience of a people bound by faith and necessity. The crisis, rooted in the mythic fear of Apollo's wrath, tested Thebes' ability to balance divine guidance with human effort. As you watch citizens return to the agora, their steps cautious but hopeful, you see how these efforts, rituals, herbs and quarantine wove a fragile survival, much like the Moirae's threads. Yet, the resolution came at a cost, and its legacy echoes in how we face crises today. The turning point likely came when a prophecy was fulfilled or reinterpreted. Perhaps a priest declared Apollo appeased after a grand sacrifice oxen burned. On a massive pyre, or a pharmakos was exiled, satisfying the city's need for purification. In Oedipus Rex, Oedipus' exile lifts the plague, a narrative mirrored in Theban traditions. You can envision a procession winding through the streets, citizens chanting thanks to Apollo, their relief palpable as death slowed. Yet, practical measures were equally critical. Healers like Mycenaean, using herbal remedies, saved some, while strict quarantine and sanitation burning corpses, cleaning wells curbed the disease's spread. Archaeological evidence from Mycenaean burial sites shows mass graves from epidemics, suggesting Thebes' cremations were effective, if grim. The cost was heavy. Families were shattered, their oikos depleted by loss or exile. The pharmakos ritual, though rare, left scars, innocents cast out to appease fear. You might imagine a community divided, some praising the priests, others resenting the sacrifices. Demanded leaders, balancing oracles and logistics, faced scrutiny. A wrong decision could spark unrest. Yet, Thebes survived, its walls still standing, its people rebuilding. The crisis strengthened communal bonds as neighbors shared resources. Much like the weavers of Story 10 who sustained their oikos, Thebes' recovery, though uncelebrated in epic, was a triumph of ordinary resilience. This legacy shaped Greek culture and beyond. The reliance on oracles persisted, but so did practical knowledge. Herbal remedies and quarantine practices informed later medical traditions seen in Hippocratic texts. Thebes' story mirrors modern pandemics where science and belief often clash. You might reflect on how today's public health measures vaccines. Isolation echo Thebes' efforts, while debates over policy recall the tension over prophecies. The chalk eyes of Story 7, the oaths of Story 8, and now Thebes' healers show how mundane acts underpin survival. As you leave Thebes, the cadmium glowing in the dawn, you see a city scarred but enduring. The plague's end was no grand victory, but a slow return to life driven by the quiet labor of healers and citizens. Their story, like the Moirae's threads, wove survival from chaos. What other crises, you might ask, had been overcome by such unheralded efforts, their lessons shaping our response to modern plagues? The quiet administration of Trojan sieges, supply chains, and record Sives stand on the windswept plain before Troy around 1200 BCE, where the Achaean army's encampment sprawls along the Hellespont. The Trojan War, immortalized in Homer's Iliad, is in its 9th year, But you are not here for the clash of heroes. Instead, you witness the uncelebrated labor of scribes, quartermasters, and laborers who managed the supply chains and records that kept the Greek siege alive. These quiet administrators, working far from the battlefield's glory, ensured the army's survival through meticulous planning and documentation. Their efforts as vital as any warrior's spear. In their ledgers and tallies, you see the backbone of a decade-long war, grounding epic tales in the mundane reality of logistics. The Achaean camp, a sprawling network of tents and huts, housed thousands of men, horses, and ships. Feeding and equipping this force required a complex supply chain, stretching across the Aegean to Mycenaean cities like Pylos and Argos. You can picture ox-drawn carts arriving from raided villages, laden with barley, olives, and dried fish, or ships from Lemnos unloading wine amphorae. The Iliad hints at these logistics, mentioning raids on Trojan allies for livestock and grain. Quartermasters, often minor nobles or trusted slaves, oversaw distribution, ensuring each contingent Achilles. Myrmidons, Agamemnon's men, received their share. You might see a quartermaster counting sacks of grain, his fingers stained with ochre used to mark supplies. Record keeping was equally critical. Scribes, trained in the Lineae script, etched tallies on clay tablets, a practice evidenced by archaeological finds at Knossos and Pylos. These tablets, baked hard by accident or design, recorded rations, weapons, and even chariot wheels. You can envision a scribe seated under a canvas shade, scratching numbers onto damp clay with a stylus, noting 100 measures of barley or 20 bronze spearheads. These records prevented waste and resolved disputes over resources, a necessity in a coalition of rival Greek leaders. The Iliad's account of Agamemnon's quarrels suggests such tensions, with supplies often at the heart of conflicts. The labor was relentless. Laborers hauled water from the Scamander River, risking Trojan ambushes, while others repaired ships or built palisades to protect the camp. You might see a man stacking firewood, his back bent under the load, or another digging a refuse pit to maintain sanitation. These tasks, though unglamorous, mirrored the camp logistics of Story 9, where Achilles' men toiled to sustain their war. The administrator's work was invisible in epic poetry, yet without it, the siege would have collapsed from starvation or discord. Maintaining this system required trust and precision, but also adaptability. Raids could fail, ships could sink, and records could be lost in the chaos of war. As you watch a scribe seal a tablet with a clay stamp, you wonder, how did these administrators navigate the challenges of a prolonged siege? And what pressures tested their fragile system of supply and record keeping? You remain in the Aegean, camp before Troy, the hum of activity unbroken as the siege grinds on. The scribes and quartermasters, laboring in the shadows of heroes, manage a supply chain stretched thin by the war's demands. Their work, rooted in the meticulous record-keeping of Lineae tablets, mirrors the precision of the weavers in Story 10, weaving order from chaos. Yet, the prolonged siege tested their ingenuity as resources dwindled and tensions among Greek leaders grew. You see a fragile system sustained by the unsung resilience of these administrators, whose efforts ensured the army's survival amidst the relentless pressures of war. The supply chain was a lifeline, but its fragility was ever present. You can picture quartermasters coordinating raids on Trojan allies, like the raids on Lesbos described in the Iliad, to seize cattle or grain. These missions were perilous, with foragers facing ambushes in the hills. Ships from Mycenaean or Ithaca brought supplies, but storms or Trojan galleys could disrupt deliveries. You might see a quartermaster inspecting a cracked amphora, its wine spoiled, forcing him to ration dwindling stocks. Water was another challenge. The Scamander River was contested, and fetching it required armed escorts. A laborer hauling water, under guard, his shoulders straining under heavy jars, embodies the daily grind that kept the camp alive. Record-keeping was the glue holding this system together. Scribes, often slaves or low-ranking officials, worked tirelessly to track resources. Archaeological evidence from Pylos shows tablets listing 60 units of wheat or 10 bronze ingots, reflecting a bureaucracy that prevented hoarding. or theft. You can envision a scribe cross-checking tablets, his brow furrowed as he reconciles conflicting tallies from rival contingents. These records were critical during disputes, like those between Agamemnon and Achilles, where claims over plunder could fracture the coalition. The Iliad's quarrels over captives and treasure hint at the underlying tension over scarce resources. Resolved only through careful administration, the administrators faced constant challenges. Disease, as seen in Thebes in Story 12, threatened. The camp, requiring sanitation efforts burning, refused, digging latrines to prevent outbreaks. You might see laborers piling debris for burning, their faces masked against the stench. Weather, too, was a foe. Winter rains rotted grain stores, while summer heat spoiled meat. Scribes adapted by prioritizing perishable goods, while quartermasters bartered with local tribes for supplies, a delicate negotiation requiring trust. The camp's diversity, Greeks from different cities, added complexity, as each leader demanded priority for his men. Despite these pressures, the administrators' resilience shone. They improvised, redirecting supplies during shortages or repairing ships with scavenged timber. Their work, though uncelebrated, was a quiet triumph, sustaining a siege that could have collapsed. As you watch a scribe tally rations by firelight, his style is steady despite the distant clash of battle. You wonder, how did these efforts shape the war's outcome? And what happened when the system faltered under the strain of Troy's resistance? You stand now at the climax of the Trojan siege, the Achaean camp buzzing as the war nears its end. The scribes and quartermasters, whose tireless work sustained the Greeks for a decade, have brought the army to this pivotal moment. Their supply chains and records, as critical as any strategy in the Iliad, enabled the final push, perhaps the Trojan horse itself, by ensuring the Greeks were fed, armed, and united. Yet, the strain of the siege exposed the system's limits, and its collapse after Troy's fall reveals the fragility of even the most meticulous administration. As you watch a quartermaster distribute the last rations before the city's sacking, you see how these quiet labors shaped the war's outcome and its enduring legacy. The supply chain's success was evident in the war's final days. The Iliad describes the Greeks' relentless raids, like those led by Achilles, which kept the camp provisioned. Archaeological evidence from Troy's layers, showing burnt granaries, suggests the Trojans faced similar supply struggles, weakened by the Achaeans' persistence. You can envision ships arriving with bronze ingots for spearheads, their delivery recorded on clay tablets, ensuring warriors were equipped for the final assault. The Trojan horse, a logistical feat, required timber and labor coordinated by the same quartermasters who managed daily rations. Without their efforts, the Greeks' deception would have faltered. Yet, the system buckled under pressure. The Iliad's account of Achilles' return and the ensuing chaos's rampage, Hector's death-strained resources. You might see scribes scrambling to update tablets as supplies dwindled, or laborers burying spoiled grain to prevent disease, echoing Thebes' plague efforts in Story 12. Internal rivalries, like those between Agamemnon and other leaders, threatened to unravel the coalition, with records resolving disputes over loot. The camp's sanitation, maintained by refuse pits and cremations, prevented outbreaks, but exhaustion took its toll. A quartermaster redistributing rations to favor Achilles' men might have sparked resentment, mirroring the oaths of loyalty. In Story 8, Troy's fall marked the system's end. The Odyssey hints at the Greeks' dispersal, their ships scattered by storms, suggesting supply chains collapsed post-victory. Tablets, no longer needed, were left to bake in the sun. There, scribes returning to Mycenaean or oblivion. The administrator's legacy, though, endured. Linear B records influenced later Greek bureaucracy, seen in Athenian archives, and their logistics prefigured modern military supply chains. You might reflect on how today's logisticians, warehouse managers, data analysts echo these ancient scribes, sustaining armies or economies with quiet precision. As you leave the camp, its fires dimming as Troy burns, you see the power of mundane labor, like the chalk eyes of Story 7 or the weavers of Story 10. These administrators wove the threads of survival. Their records, etched in clay, were as vital as any sword. What other silent systems You might ask, have underpinned history's great victories, their makers forgotten yet essential? Fates thread in medieval tapestries, depicting Greek myths in castle sieu. Step into a grand hall of a 14th century French castle, where the stone walls are softened by vibrant tapestries, their threads glowing in the flickering torchlight. These woven masterpieces, far more than mere decoration, depict scenes from Greek myths' heroes, gods and the Moirae, the fates who spin, measure and cut life's threads. In medieval Europe, such tapestries were prized possessions, their creation a labor-intensive art that echoed the weaving of ancient Greek households. In Story 10, here you witness artisans weaving not just cloth but narratives, linking the medieval world to classical antiquity, their work a testament to the enduring power of myth and destiny. The hall, perhaps in a castle like those of the Loire Valley, is a space of power and prestige, where lords hosted feasts and councils. Tapestries, often costing more than armor, served as both insulation and status symbols. You can picture a scene of the Trojan War, Achilles slaying Hector, woven in rich wool and silk, its colors dyed with madder and woad. These images, drawn from Greek stories preserved in manuscripts like Ovid's Metamorphoses, were chosen to inspire or educate, their figures of fate resonating with a Christian world that still grappled with divine will. The Moirae, depicted as three women with spindle, rod and shears, mirrored medieval beliefs in God's plan, blending pagan and Christian threads. The creation of these tapestries was a collaborative feat, not unlike the Greek oikos, in workshops. In Arras or Brussels, weavers, mostly men, unlike their ancient counterparts, worked on massive looms, following cartoon sketches drawn by artists. You might see a weaver threading a shuttle through a warp of linen, each pass building a scene of Athena or the Fates. Wool was the primary material, sourced from local sheep, while silk and gold threads imported via trade routes added luxury. The process was slow. A single tapestry, like those in the Apocalypse series, could take years, requiring hundreds of hours to complete a single square meter. These workshops buzzed with activity, much like the armorers forge in Story 11. Apprentices prepared dyes, boiling indigo or crushing cochineal, while master weavers ensured precision. The designs, often based on Greek myths, reached Europe through trade and the Crusades, with Byzantine textiles and manuscripts carrying tales of Troy or the labors of Hercules. You can envision a monk copying a Latin text of Homer, his work inspiring a lord to commission a tapestry. These weavings were not just art but narratives of fate, their threads a literal and symbolic echo of the Moirae. Yet, the labor was grueling, with weavers risking eye strain and cramped hands. Their work, though admired, was rarely credited, their names lost to history. As you admire a tapestry's intricate threads, you wonder, how did these woven myths shape the medieval imagination? And what challenges did artisans face in bringing Greek stories to life? You linger in the castle hall, the tapestry's vivid scenes of Greek myths casting a spell over the stone walls. The Moirae, woven as three solemn figures, seem to watch over the room, their threads a reminder of fate's power in both ancient and medieval minds. These tapestries, crafted in workshops across 14th century Europe, were more than art. They were cultural bridges, carrying Greek stories into a Christian world. Their creation, rooted in the weaving traditions of Story 10, required immense skill and collaboration, but also faced challenges of cost, precision, and interpretation. As you trace the threads of a Trojan War scene, you see how these works shaped the medieval imagination and the artisans who wove them. The tapestry's influence was profound, shaping how lords and their courts understood their world. You can picture a banquet where guests discuss a tapestry of Theseus and the Minotaur, its story drawn from Ovid or a monk's translation of Apollodorus. These myths, filtered through Christian allegory, cast heroes like Hercules as models of virtue, while the Moirae echoed divine providence. Chronicles, like those of Froissart, note lords commissioning tapestries to display lineage or piety, their Greek themes signaling erudition. You might imagine a knight, inspired by Achilles' woven valor, aspiring to similar glory, his vows echoing the feudal oaths of Story 8. The weaving process was a feat of coordination, In workshops, artists drafted cartoons, detailed sketches, while weavers translated them into thread. You can envision a master weaver aligning colored wools, ensuring Hector's shield gleamed red against Troy's walls. Silk and gold threads, imported from the east via Venice, were costly, reserved for wealthy patrons. Archaeological finds like dye vats in Bruges show the scale of production, with vats bubbling with madder or kermes for vibrant hues. Each tapestry required thousands of hours, with teams of weavers working in shifts, their looms creaking under the weight of massive warps, sometimes 10 meters wide. Challenges abounded. Errors in a cartoon could ruin months of work, and dyes faded if poorly mixed. You might see an apprentice scolded for a misaligned thread, disrupting a scene of Athena's loom. The cost of materials strained even noble budgets, and trade disruptions like piracy in the Mediterranean delayed silk deliveries. Weavers, often guild members, faced physical tolls, back pain from bending over looms, eyes strained by dim light. Unlike the Greek women of Story 10, these weavers were mostly men, their status higher but still subservient to patrons. Guild records from Tournai list strict rules, ensuring quality but limiting creative freedom. Yet, the tapestries wove a shared cultural thread linking medieval Europe to Greece. They educated, inspired, and preserved stories in a world without widespread literacy. As you watch a weaver knot a golden thread into the Moirae spindle, you wonder, how did these tapestries influence the knights and lords who gazed upon them? And what did their creation reveal about the medieval world's view of fate? You stand now in the same castle hall, the tapestries' Greek myths glowing as if alive. They're scenes of the Moirae and Trojan heroes weaving a narrative that shaped medieval thought. These woven works, bridging the 14th century world with ancient Greece, did more than adorn walls. They influenced behavior, reinforced power, and preserved stories of fate in a Christian era. Their creation, a triumph of artistry and labor, faced immense challenges, yet their legacy endures, echoing the resilience of the weavers in Story 10 and the scribes of Story 13. As you gaze at a tapestry of the fates, you see how these threads of myth and craft wove a lasting cultural tapestry. The tapestry's impact on medieval society was profound. Lords used them to project authority, their Greek themes signaling a connection to classical wisdom. You can imagine a knight, like those in Story 11, studying a tapestry of Hercules, seeing his own trials reflected in the hero's labors, his oaths of fealty strengthened by such imagery. The Moirae, woven as solemn arbiters, resonated with Christian ideas of divine judgment, prompting reflection on mortality. Chronicles, like those of Jean de Joinville, described tapestries in royal halls where they sparked discussions on virtue and destiny, shaping courtly ideals. These works, hung during tournaments or councils, were propaganda, education, and art in one. The creation process, though, was fraught with difficulty. Weavers faced not only physical strain but logistical hurdles. You might see a master weaver adjusting a loom's tension, correcting a warped thread that could ruin a year's work. The cost of silk and gold, often imported through perilous trade routes, strained patrons' coffers, with records from Bruges showing tapestries valued higher than land. Misinterpretations of Greek myths filtered through Latin texts could lead to errors. A cartoon of Clotho might be mistaken for a saint, confusing the narrative. Guilds enforced standards, but rivalries between workshops in Arras and Paris sparked delays or sabotage. Yet, weavers persevered, their skill turning sketches into vibrant stories. The legacy of these tapestries stretches beyond the Middle Ages. They preserve Greek myths for the Renaissance, when artists like Botticelli drew on their imagery. You might reflect on how modern museums, displaying fragments like the Bayeux tapestry, echo this tradition, or how film and literature still draw on Greek tales of fate. The chalk eyes of Story 7 forged armor, the Theban healers of Story 12 fought plagues, and these weavers wove culture, each craft shaping history's unseen foundations. The tapestries, like the Moirae's threads, bound past to present. Their creators' labor acquired force as you leave the hall, the tapestry's colors fading in the torchlight. You see their enduring power. They were more than decoration, they were a dialogue between eras, weaving fate into the medieval world. What other crafts, you might ask, have silently shaped our cultural memory, their threads still holding us to the past? Fate's thread in medieval tapestries, depicting Greek myths in castle sieu. Step into a grand hall of a 14th century French castle, where the stone walls are softened by vibrant tapestries, their threads glowing in the flickering torchlight. These woven masterpieces, far more than mere decoration, depict scenes from Greek myths' heroes, gods and the Moirae, the fates who spin, measure and cut life's threads. In medieval Europe, such tapestries were prized possessions, their creation a labor-intensive art that echoed the weaving of ancient Greek households. In Story 10, here you witness artisans weaving not just cloth but narratives, linking the medieval world to classical antiquity, their work a testament to the enduring power of myth and destiny. The hall, perhaps in a castle like those of the Loire Valley, is a space of power and prestige, where lords hosted feasts and councils. Tapestries, often costing more than armor, served as both insulation and status symbols. You can picture a scene of the Trojan War, Achilles slaying Hector, woven in rich wool and silk, its colors dyed with madder and woad. These images, drawn from Greek stories preserved in manuscripts like Ovid's Metamorphoses, were chosen to inspire or educate, their figures of fate resonating with a Christian world that still grappled with divine will. The Moirae, depicted as 3 women with spindle, rod and shears, mirrored medieval beliefs in God's plan, blending pagan and Christian threads. The creation of these tapestries was a collaborative feat, not unlike the Greek oikos, in workshops. In Arras or Brussels, weavers, mostly men, unlike their ancient counterparts, worked on massive looms, following cartoon sketches drawn by artists. You might see a weaver threading a shuttle through a warp of linen, each pass building a scene of Athena or the Fates. Wool was the primary material, sourced from local sheep, while silk and gold threads imported via trade routes added luxury. The process was slow. A single tapestry, like those in the Apocalypse series, could take years, requiring hundreds of hours to complete a single square meter. These workshops buzzed with activity, much like the armorer's forge in Story 11. Apprentices prepare dyes, boiling indigo or crushing cochineal, while master weavers ensured precision. The designs, often based on Greek myths, reached Europe through trade and the Crusades, with Byzantine textiles and manuscripts carrying tales of Troy or the labors of Hercules. You can envision a monk copying a Latin text of Homer, his work inspiring a lord to commission a tapestry. These weavings were not just art but narratives of fate, their threads a literal and symbolic echo of the Moirae. Yet, the labor was grueling, with weavers risking eye strain and cramped hands. Their work, though admired, was rarely credited, their names lost to history. As you admire a tapestry's intricate threads, you wonder, how did these woven myths shape the medieval imagination? And what challenges did artisans face in bringing Greek stories to life? You linger in the castle hall, the tapestry's vivid scenes of Greek myths casting a spell over the stone walls. The Moirae, woven as 3 solemn figures, seem to watch over the room, their threads a reminder of fate's power in both ancient and medieval minds. These tapestries, crafted in workshops across 14th century Europe, were more than art. They were cultural bridges, carrying Greek stories into a Christian world. Their creation, rooted in the weaving traditions of Story 10, required immense skill and collaboration, but also faced challenges of cost, precision, and interpretation. As you trace the threads of a Trojan War scene, you see how these works shaped the medieval imagination and the artisans who wove them. The tapestry's influence was profound, shaping how lords and their courts understood their world. You can picture a banquet where guests discuss a tapestry of Theseus and the Minotaur, its story drawn from Ovid or a monk's translation of Apollodorus. These myths, filtered through Christian allegory, cast heroes like Hercules as models of virtue, while the Moirae echoed divine providence. Chronicles, like those of Froissart, note lords commissioning tapestries to display lineage or piety, their Greek themes signaling erudition. You might imagine a knight inspired by Achilles' woven valor, aspiring to similar glory. His vows echoing the feudal oaths of Story 8. The weaving process was a feat of coordination. In workshops, artists drafted cartoons, detailed sketches, while weavers translated them into thread. You can envision a master weaver aligning colored wools, ensuring Hector's shield gleamed red against Troy's walls. Silk and gold threads, imported from the East via Venice, were costly, reserved for wealthy patrons. Archaeological finds, like dye vats in Bruges, show the scale of production, with vats bubbling with madder or kermes for vibrant hues. Each tapestry required thousands of hours, with teams of weavers working in shifts, their looms creaking under the weight of massive warps, sometimes 10 meters wide. Challenges abounded. Errors in a cartoon could ruin months of work, and dyes faded if poorly mixed. You might see an apprentice scolded for a misaligned thread, disrupting a scene of Athena's loom. The cost of materials strained even noble budgets, and trade disruptions like piracy in the Mediterranean delayed silk deliveries. Weavers, often guild members, faced physical tolls, back pain from bending over looms, eyes strained by dim light. Unlike the Greek women of Story 10, these weavers were mostly men, their status higher but still subservient to patrons. Guild records from Tournai list strict rules, ensuring quality but limiting creative freedom. Yet, the tapestries wove a shared cultural thread, linking medieval Europe to Greece. They educated, inspired, and preserved stories in a world without widespread literacy. As you watch a weaver knot a golden thread into the Moirae spindle, you wonder, how did these tapestries influence the knights and lords who gazed upon them? And what did their creation reveal about the medieval worlds? View of fate! You stand now in the same castle hall, the tapestries' Greek myths glowing as if alive. They're scenes of the Moirae and Trojan heroes weaving a narrative that shaped medieval thought. These woven works, bridging the 14th century world with ancient Greece, did more than adorn walls. They influenced behavior, reinforced power, and preserved stories of fate in a Christian era. Their creation, a triumph of artistry and labor, faced immense challenges, yet their legacy endures, echoing the resilience of the weavers in Story 10 and the scribes of Story 13. As you gaze at a tapestry of the fates, you see how these threads of myth and craft wove a lasting cultural tapestry. The tapestry's impact on medieval society was profound. Lords used them to project authority, their Greek themes signaling a connection to classical wisdom. You can imagine a knight, like those in Story 11, studying a tapestry of Hercules, seeing his own trials reflected in the hero's labors, his oaths of fealty strengthened by such imagery. The Moirae, woven as solemn arbiters, resonated with Christian ideas of divine judgment, prompting reflection on mortality. Chronicles, like those of Jean de Joinville, describe tapestries in royal halls where they sparked discussions on virtue and destiny, shaping courtly ideals. These works, hung during tournaments or councils, were propaganda, education, and art in one. The creation process, though, was fraught with difficulty. Weavers faced not only physical strain but logistical hurdles. You might see a master weaver adjusting a loom's tension, correcting a warped thread that could ruin a year's work. The cost of silk and gold, often imported through perilous trade routes, strained patrons' coffers, with records from Bruges showing tapestries valued higher than land. Misinterpretations of Greek myths filtered through Latin texts could lead to errors. A cartoon of Clotho might be mistaken for a saint, confusing the narrative. Guilds enforced standards, but rivalries between workshops in Arras and Paris sparked delays or sabotage. Yet, weavers persevered, their skill turning sketches into vibrant stories. The legacy of these tapestries stretches beyond the Middle Ages. They preserved Greek myths for the Renaissance, when artists like Botticelli drew on their imagery. You might reflect on how modern museums, displaying fragments like the Bayeux tapestry, echo this tradition, or how film and literature still draw on Greek tales of fate. The chalk eyes of Story 7 forged armor, the Theban healers of Story 12 fought plagues, and these weavers wove culture, each craft shaping history's unseen foundations. The tapestries, like the Moirae's threads, bound past to present. Their creator's labor acquired force as you leave the hall. The tapestry's colors fading in the torchlight. You see their enduring power. They were more than decoration, they were a dialogue between eras, weaving fate into the medieval world. What other crafts, you might ask, have silently shaped our cultural memory? Their threads still holding us to the past?